All right, this is Chair Brian Haggerty of the Board of Trustees of the El Paso Community College, calling this meeting to be started at 1 p.m. It's a special meeting located here at the Administrative Service Center. All attendees are required to wear adequate face coverings or masks and maintain proper social distance. All backup and related materials for this meeting can be accessed at the following link: epcc.edu/administration/Board of Trustees. I would like to welcome everyone and call this meeting to order. Pam, can you take a roll?
Just one moment, sir. Okay, sorry. Mr. Uxer,
Present.
Ms. Sanchez. Here. Mrs. Robles,
Present.
Dr. Graham,
Here.
Ms. Pena,
Here.
Mr. Haggett.
Here.
Ms. Nahara is running about 15 minutes late.
Okay.
She'll be here.
All right, Pam, has anybody registered for public comment?
No, sir, they have not.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and move to the discussion items. Pam, if you could read 4.1, please.
Dr. Julie Penley, Vice President of Research, Accreditation, and Planning, will provide an update on the Texas Association of School Boards, TASB, policy process and seek feedback from the Board of Trustees.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would it be,
It would be better if you took your mask off.
Thank
I don't think we're
you.
going to catch anything.
I hope you don't. All right, well, thank you for your time this afternoon. I wanted to have a conversation with you and walk you through where we are with our TASB localization process. You all have been hard at work for several months, and we've made significant progress, but we still have a few things left to do, and so that's what I wanted to talk with you about. And you do each have a binder with materials that I'm going to walk you through tab by tab. So let me pull this up. Your binder is broken down into 5 sections. The first section has to do with a summary of everything that you have seen in your monthly meetings. And this table summarizes your current or previous board policies, if you will, as well as the TASB local counterpart. Remember, the local policies you do have to approve. You can choose not to if that's best, but they do require some action on your part. And then the 2 right-hand columns summarize the months that you will be seeing or have seen each policy. And as you can see, there are a total of 90 of your 230 policies that fall into this category. So a significant chunk will be converted pending board approval to a local policy. Any questions about anything in Table 1? Okay. Oh, Lord. Okay, I'm going to try to work on this. Okay, moving on. Okay. So now the second tab in your binder, Table 2, is a summary of the legal policies that are already in place on the EPCC TASB portal. These do not require board approval because, of course, they are grounded in statute. And similar to Table 1, this table summarizes your current policies and how they align with the TASB legals. The reason that I'm presenting this table to you is, although you all do not have to approve the legal policies, they do have a consequence because they supersede your local or your current board policies. We don't need those policies anymore. We don't need the policies that are listed on the left-hand column. Rather than simply strike them from our records and from our archives, though, I do recommend that you allow me to present them in a formal board abstract as an agenda item, so you all can formally move to approve the deletion of these for documentation only.
You need our permission to do that?
Well, I don't, it's not necessarily an action item. I just wanted you to understand
You'd
that
like us to
recommendation,
cross
where it's
our-
coming from, and say, yeah, I think that's appropriate, and we'll see it in a board agenda
You want
item.
to cross our Ts and dot our Is, okay. Put it on the agenda and we'll vote on it.
Dr. Penley, I have a question.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
when you do that, it'll just be a posting, as you mentioned, to do the abstract, so are we not actually going to see the legal policies themselves?
Good point. So actually, two good points in there. The legal policies are, as I mentioned, they're already in the TASB portal. So for example, let's see, the first policy listed in Table 2 is safeguarding district assets, and that is replaced or redundant with CDB legal. So if we go to the public-facing portal, you don't need a username or password. You go to the business and support services, and, oh boy. There we go. This hand-eye coordination with this process. All right, and so the CDB legal with our institutional information up on top is already in our portal. Okay. So we can certainly provide copies of these legal policies if you prefer, but they're available electronically right now for anybody that wants to review them. A related point, Ms. Sanchez, to this information in Table 2 is because these policies are already in the portal and there's really no need to formally review them and approve them as you would the local policies. With the board's consent, we can provide this as a one-time board agenda item where you would simply vote to approve. So we wouldn't have to go through a 2-month process as we were doing with the local policies.
And you're just referring to the legal policies,
Just
correct?
to the legal policies, just to those 83 policies in Table 2.
I'm okay with that. I think that makes sense. I think we can have access to it on the public portal if we want to go back and look at it, but in terms of record-keeping purposes, that makes complete sense for the board to take formal action to adopt them.
Yes, just so that when we're celebrating our 100th anniversary in 49 years and our successors are trying to figure out what we did back in 2020 and 2021, we'll have that historical record. Okay, then I will work to put that on a future board agenda for you. And together, those two tables, Table 1 and Table 2, are the vast majority of your policies. So that's good news. 173 of your policies are covered either in Table 1 with the locals or Table 2 with the legals. So now we get to a little bit heavier conversation. So the next section in your binder is a little bit thicker, the next two sections actually, tabs 3 and 4. And these are the policies that have not been covered either by a current TASB local or by a TASB legal. So we have to make a decision what to do with these remaining 57 policies. The first table, Table 3, includes the policies that, based on my review, based on input from Scott Hulse, from TASB, from my fellow cabinet members, I am comfortable recommending the deletion of these policies in this table. And to, yes, sir.
If they're not from TASB, where do they come from? Is this something that the board just developed over time?
Good point. Yes, these are current policies or historical policies, and so the number in the left-hand column represents the current numbering system. And if you look at the policies in tab 3 in your binder, you can kind of see a history at the very bottom of each page. It tells you when the policy was developed, which area of the college it speaks to. But these are policies that the board has had on their books since whatever the original approval date was.
They were developed locally.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think, much of what was in there is really procedural, not necessarily a guiding policy, but the procedure. So my question is, I don't have a problem with us deleting them from the policies, but where are we gonna have a place where the procedures are gonna be housed?
That's a great point. And again, this whatever you all decide with this table and with the next table is completely up to you. We can work with TASB to develop a policy, or if you look at this table, I tried to give you some rationale for why we're suggesting that possibly these could be deleted. As Dr. Graham said, many of these are procedural in nature, and so we would convert them to a college procedure, which would still be on the books. In some cases, they may speak to a specific role or individual at the college, and so we can put that content perhaps in that person's job description, or we can put the information somewhere else. In some cases, I'll be honest, there are some things that it's just not needed, period. And we might be able to just say, it served its purpose at the time, but in 2021, it no longer needs to be a formal policy, and we'll move on. These are quite varied in their justification for why they might be deleted. I don't know if you are comfortable saying anything about that right now. If you want some time and give me guidance in a future board meeting, or if you have any input right now or thoughts on that.
I think one of my concerns would be, or a caution, that if we agree to delete them as a board, which again, I don't have a problem with that if that's the recommendation, but that we can be assured that the procedural piece is already resting in a policy somewhere, or that we're gonna have a regulation area where they can be housed, so that we don't completely eliminate them and they're not anywhere else, because then that can create a problem. So I agree with you that they don't serve the purpose of being in the policies, but, being 57, I know it's a lot, but that somebody can go through them and say, okay, this particular one, we don't need because it's antiquated, it doesn't apply anymore, let's delete it. But this particular one, needs to be in such an area, and that we have it somewhere as a procedural piece, something along those lines. I was specifically looking at, for example, the career advancement, or the dismissal and suspension of contracted administrative professional support and classified staff. All of those, they can be in the HR policies or procedures, as long as we don't completely lose them, and then later something comes up and, well, you all deleted them.
That's an excellent point. So I have two responses for you, Dr. Graham. so table 3, we're only looking at 29 of those policies that fall into that category, not the full 57. We can move forward if that is the will of the board with applying these recommendations in the far right-hand column. But as a verification or a check on our work, we could leave these policies in place, and then once the policy or the procedure has been developed, once the job description has been revised, then we could present these policies in a board agenda for deletion with the documentation of here's where the content has been moved.
And what will we do, like, for example, on the commencement, just as an example?
Okay.
You know, the policy directs CEO to establish procedures, but no formal college procedures are in place. So student enrollment services maintains the process, which is great when you have people that are familiar with the process. But, you know, if we wiped up a department or changed leadership in our department or something, then what will that new person have to go back on to figure out the, you know? So that's my fear, that we don't want to wipe out a lot, which I know we don't need it, but that we don't leave procedures available either.
That is a great point for our successors in 49 years. They'll want to have that record. That's a terrific point. Mr. Exner?
Penny, maybe I'm not that familiar, but some of the organizations I've worked with have what is known as a policy and procedures manual, something totally separate. Do we have something like that?
We do. We have it on our college institutional effectiveness website, policy by policy. We used to also have a compendium of all of the policies and procedures in one file.
But we don't have a separate procedures manual.
We have a manual of the procedures.
Well, then if we have a procedure here, can't we just move everything out of the procedures, put it into a procedure manual? I mean, there it is.
We
And
absolutely.
and we can have a historical section, you know, I mean, and that takes care of Dr. Graham's concern. Hey, here it is. It doesn't, but if that situation ever comes up, hey, how did we handle it before?
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
But have a procedure manual, and don't go mixing procedures and policies, because all of a sudden, then, well, if I do this, do I have to change that? Or
Right. And it's, they do overlap and support each other, of course, but we are asking for the board's input specifically on the policies. And we would be happy to share, if you all say we prefer this as a procedure, we'd be happy to provide that. But we don't want to overtax you by having you all get down into the running of the college and writing procedures with us. We can take care of that for you.
But we don't have a procedure manual as such. I mean, you can't go to pull out this book and said, for graduation, this is a procedure.
We do. We have our manual of our current procedures.
But I think what she's trying to do, if I understand you correctly, Dr. Penley, is she's trying to eliminate or delete the ones that are duplicate or that are no longer needed because whatever that was is not taking place. So the reduction is a good idea.
Well, and yes, I mean, I'm always for house cleaning and organizing. At the end of this TASB process, though, we cannot have all of our policies need to be in the TASB portal. And so these few in this table that don't fit into anything that TASB has, we need to decide, are we going to make it fit and ask TASB to help us write a specific policy, or are we going to say, you know, maybe these policies are no longer needed and we can just move to delete them. And again, these may not be decisions that you're comfortable making, you know, spur of the moment. So if you have a general sense of, we want to do this, we need more time, that's why I wanted to pick your brains this afternoon.
Dr. Penley, we could still, the board could still delete the policy and we could maintain a procedure, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And we already have the procedure manual online. It corresponds to policies, and sometimes they get a little convoluted. And this is part of the process that Dr. Penley and that several of the board members asked us years back to go through the TASB process. But there's no reason, Dr. Graham, that we can't maintain the procedure within the procedures manual. Just to ensure the history of, as you indicated, that this still occurs. It's a really good point with regards to commencement, that we have a set process and that can still be documented within the procedures manual. But move this out of policy so that we're consistent with the TASB.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Marie.
Rosemary Marin, sir. Just very quickly, Dr. Penny and I talked about the fact that if we keep procedures, we just need to ensure that they are consistent with what's in policy. And that's what Dr. Penny is doing, right? She's going through them with a fine-tooth comb. And some of the current procedures fit perfectly with the policy, and some do not. And those that do not are the ones that concern me the most, because we cannot have, once we adopt all the TASB policies, we can't then have inconsistent procedures. And so that, Dr. Penny, if that's correctly summarizing what I think that what we're looking for is direction from the board on those specific ones that don't quite fit. They may be okay, and some of them may not contradict the policy at all, and so they can stay. But those that may contradict the policy or have a different procedure than what's in policy, those are the ones we need to know what direction to go.
If I can comment really quickly. Thank you, Ms. Marin. Dr. Penley, I think absolutely for consistency's sake, what you don't want is a policy or procedure overlapping, or it could be interpreted either way, because that's where it's not clear and there's no clarity, and so a lot of confusion. I'm comfortable with the direction we're not posted for action in terms of deleting them, with the understanding and to direct staff to ensure that if it doesn't necessarily fit then with what TASB's format is what I'm understanding, that we make it fit or clarified then somewhere else. And I don't know if that's a procedure or policy or whatever, but that is at least flushed out or documented somewhere else, so where we've had it in a policy or in a procedure, because there was that outline, because there was some direction to staff on how to proceed on a particular matter, that remain within your all's discretion to figure out how to do that. But absolutely, I don't feel comfortable. I mean, I get the idea in terms of historical documentation, blah, 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 but I don't like the idea of having it there and it being misinterpreted because it's not clear, right? And putting it in different places. So that's my point of view. I just want to make sure that there's just one consistent format or whatever you want to call it on how you need to guide to do whatever you need to do under each of these titles.
Okay.
Well said.
I don't know if that gives you any direction, Dr.
It does, and I would like to go ahead and move to the next table and then come back and summarize, because now we're looking at 3 possible categories of deleting policies, and I just want to make sure I understand what the...
Yeah, and if it's not clear, then tell us. Like,
Sure,
that makes
no,
zero
I-
sense, and I don't like that idea, and this
No,
is maybe
no,
a
no.
better
These are
direction
your
to go.
policies,
Right.
and so I am, I have
Yeah.
opinions. My boss will tell you I have lots of opinions about lots of things, but these are your policies, and
Right.
so I can offer recommendations only.
And from a practical standpoint, right? Because you all are the ones that need to go through it and interpret it and deal with it. And so it's
Yeah.
very much appreciated whatever direction you can give us on
And
that.
we want to protect you all as well, of course.
Right,
I mean,
absolutely.
Sure. Okay, so let me go forward into table 4, and then we'll pause and we'll summarize what I understand you all would like to do. Okay. So table 4 in your binder, these are 28 policies. They also do not currently fit into a TASB policy. However, Cabinet, Scott Hulse, TASB, and I recommend making them fit and generating some new TASB policies, because this content is so important, and in some cases, it's almost too important to rely on only being documented in a handbook or in a procedure. And so we have, it looks like it's a lot of policies, but if you scan that right-hand column, you'll see some of these can actually be grouped together into a single TASB policy. They are generally having to do with personnel issues, descriptions and categorizations of employees. Some have to do with community relations or with local governance, and some have to do with the financial area under VP Shaughnessy.
Excuse me,
Yes, sir.
I have a question. You say if this does not match a specific TASB policy, then we'll go back to TASB if we just haven't needed, and we'll generate one. So what the procedure of generation, what is it, do you make it consistent, what's involved? Consistent with law, consistent with state procedures, consistent with, so what's involved in actually generating this policy?
So I'm going to rely on my good friends at Scott Hulse to help me draft the language. In many cases, the current policies language is appropriate, and we can simply reformat it to the physical appearance of a TASB policy. You're absolutely right. We do want to make sure it doesn't conflict with any of the legal policies or with other statute. And then we would ask both Scott Hulse and TASB to review it to make sure everything is on the up and up before we bring it to you as a local policy for your review and hopefully for your approval and adoption.
Does TASB accept any responsibility for the legal validity of policies that they approve?
Yes and no. They do approve, they do guarantee, if you will, the local policies that they provide, the templates. So you've seen some of these policies with very few edits. And in those cases, those are generated by TASB. They back them, if you will. They also update them as statute changes, which is incredibly important. They also automatically update the legal policies that are in the portal, which is one of the reasons why they recommend we don't have paper copies lying around, is as a policy gets updated, we don't want to run the risk of looking at an old version. The reason I said yes and no is if we ask TASB to help us generate new policies, such as what's listed in Table 4, they do not maintain those they house them, but they do not maintain them. They do not ensure their currency or their accuracy. So that is extra work on our part to make sure that we stay on top of those policies.
And Dr. Penley, to respond, in addition to what Dr. Penley stated, Mr. Auxer, the more we deviate from the policies that TASB provides to us, and I know at first we were getting certain policies from them, and we had interpretations of what we think we need to include or modify. The more we deviate from those standard policies that have been vetted by TASB, the less likely it is that we could go back and hold them accountable if any of those policies came into question.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind that TASB is going to be providing the guidance on the legal policies, but the local policies is really up to the board. I mean, we might have a policy that is only exclusive to EPCC that nobody else has because, that's what we want to happen here. But they certainly will give us guidance on whether or not it sounds good after legal here reviews it, and but we can We can tweak the local ones, we can change them, we can add to them, we can delete them. But they're mostly keeping us on track with all the legal policies, that we don't miss any of them. And after the legislature, you're gonna see a slew of policies coming back, if they're dealing with higher ed. And then they make the recommendation that we don't have this one, we need to adopt it, or we have this one, but now it's going to change because of something that happened during the legislative sessions. But I think, the more comfortable we become with their system, I think everybody's gonna be happy with the outcome. And certainly cleaning it up to get it to that level is gonna be a challenge for you all, for everybody, actually.
Dr. Sosa, if I may.
Please, Ms. Marie.
Dr. Graham, you're right in that when we adopt the legal policies, that's an easy one, right? Because they keep up with the statutes and so forth. When we adopt the local policies, such as the ones that have been proposed by TASB, prepared by TASB, presented to you by Dr. Kennedy, where all we have done is basically filled in the blanks on very few places, those are not really policies that you can deviate from, because if you deviate too much, that's where TASB says, no, we're not going to guarantee them, because we wrote these, they're standardized, and we want them written like this. While you can change things, like, for example, an grievance policy, and you could say, we don't want it to be 5 days after the occurrence, we want it to be 15 days after the occurrence. Or we don't want to have 3 steps in the grievance, we want to have 4 steps in the grievance. Those kinds of things, while you can change those things, the difficulty is changing them so much that TASB no longer will guarantee them. And what Mr. Ortega was referring to was, if we then take a step, the next step to say, we're going to create new policies because they don't fit into TASB, but our procedures are too important, and we can't put them somewhere else. We can't put them in job descriptions. We can't put them in anywhere else in the college, but it's an important topic that has to be covered. Then those are new policies that need to be prepared. The caution that we're putting forward is those should be minimized, because those will not be guaranteed by TASB. They're not going to be, even though they're guiding us, they're helping us, they're going to review them, they're not going to guarantee them like they do the local and the legal that you all have been looking at.
I'm trying to, okay, so here, to kind of give you a visual, if you were to go to the portal, or if anybody were to go to our portal, this is, has to do with the board member elections. There is a legal policy which has been in our portal since day one. You all reviewed and approved the policy, the local policies in this category earlier in the year, so now our local policy is now in our portal. And when you open that file, at the very bottom of every policy, it will tell you the date that it was issued, and then that middle line is when it was updated last. And then at the very bottom, you'll see it says BBB Local X. And a Local X is what Mr. Ortega and Ms. Marin were talking about, that we have to maintain these policies ourselves and ensure that they remain current. This particular policy is one that we probably will not have to do much work on, because it has to do with the statute defining how our number of trustees were selected. So that took some work on Scott Hulse's part to find that case and find that information. So at the bottom of every policy, if it says local, that means TASB is walking with us and maintaining that. If there's ever a policy that says Local X, those are ours. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So back to the original conversation, these policies don't have a TASB counterpart. We do think that they are worth saving, if you will, as a policy. But that's the caveat, is that it would be an EPCC-specific local policy that we would maintain. And some of the things that we discussed earlier would also come into play here. We would provide these to you in a board meeting for action. In this case, because there would be a new local policy, we would provide that as well, so you could see the comparison. That's one option. The other option with both this set of policies and those in Table 3 is you may say, you know what, this is just too many what-ifs, and we just want to follow the TASB recommendations, period, and we just want to delete everything that doesn't fit into a TASB policy. It's up to you.
How long has TASB been around?
Oh. I do not know.
How many schools do they cover?
They work with almost all of the community colleges in Texas. They work with them in different levels. Some colleges say, yeah, put our policies and our procedures up there and you deal with all of it. Some are like EPCC and say, no, you all deal with our policies, we'll take care of our procedures ourselves. I'm sure that there are different levels of involvement, but every community college is involved with TASB in one way or another.
So as long as TASB's been around, I would assume that the policies that they have for all these schools pretty much cover everything that needs, I would assume. So I agree with you. I think we should all bundle them up and say, well, just go with what the TASB has on the books. They've been around. You can't tell me how long they've been around.
Yeah.
They've been longer than El Paso Community College?
70 years.
70 years.
Well, there you go. They got 20 years on us, so I figured they know what they're doing. Not saying that we don't know what we're doing, but we decided to go with TASB. I would assume that's what you were pushing, right, Dr. Graham? Well, with your guidance. Let me put it that way.
Once
Your
we
guidance, Dr. Graham.
Once we make a decision, it's we, remember.
Well, that's right, you gotta have 4 votes, but I understand, but what I'm saying is that, why do we have all this extra stuff if TASB's already, I say bundle it up and go with what they got.
So one of the questions I have, because, and again, my frame of reference is the district, right? Because we have if you look up a policy for the SISD, for example, you're gonna find the same the same process that you have, that you just looked a little while ago. Mm-hmm. But it gives you both. It gives you the legal and it gives you the local right below it. Mm-hmm. For the particular school district. Mm-hmm. So am I understanding that if they house the locals for us, that's gonna be separate, or are they going to do both? And then in ours, we have the legal, the local, and then you have the regulation, mm-hmm. which is really giving more clarity. Mm-hmm. For example, students may or may not wear uniforms, mm-hmm. is the legal. Mm-hmm. The local is all students in elementary will wear uniforms, mm-hmm. Leaving out the high school. So mm-hmm. it just gives more clarity to the policies, but they're housing all three. They're housing mm-hmm. the legal, the local, and the regulations. Mm-hmm. So would that be different, the way that the college is setting it up?
The way we have contracted with TASB is we have them house the legal, of course, as well as our local policies. Okay, so whether it's a specific local, a local X, or a generic local. Okay. In this case, this is still the policy having to do with board elections. There's an exhibit, and that's just the documentation that a candidate would fill out. There are very few exhibits in the TASB system. They're always tied to a legal policy. So those are are not coming to you for approval, they're just kind of packaged with the legal. What TASB calls a regulation, we call a college procedure. And we did not contract with TASB to provide that service. We will maintain our college procedures internally and ensure that they continue to align with the policies.
So if we have, for example, a student that is, trying to file a complaint and he or she goes to the TESB policy, they will read the legal, they will read the local. But if he wants to find out exactly how do you submit this or where do you take it, where is that information going to be, the procedural, so that they have access to it? Because that's the idea, that the public has access to everything. The transparency is there. We've got the policies, and then how do they access the procedures? So it's not going to be in a binder somewhere that, you can't figure it out from the website.
Right. No, very, very good point. Again, this is a public-facing portal, so anybody can access it. At the very bottom of and there are many ways to get to it, but at the very bottom of our public-facing college website, we've got our policies and procedures. The very first link on that page is to the policies and procedures. This is a bit like the construction around town. It's a work in progress while we're going through the TASB localization. We have a search box to help people. So if they say, I have a grievance or I have a complaint, and they have the options for finding those specific procedures.
Okay, so they would be able to search for the
Yes, ma'am.
procedures
Yes,
online?
ma'am.
Okay.
And then also in some of the legal policies and the local policies, you might recall there are specific individuals at the college listed, Dr. Gonzalez or Ms.
Right.
Field. And so that information is also generally listed there that people can follow up. Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions about what we've gone over so far? Nope. Okay. So,
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have one other question.
sure.
So the gentleman that was working the policies prior to us moving in with TESB, what role is he playing in this? Because, again, he's got that institutional knowledge from probably way back. And, what is his role, or how can I want to make sure that we don't lose that institutional knowledge should it come up later on, and that he's involved with the policies somehow, either helping you or maintaining some aspect. Because once we get it all cleaned up, then there's got to be a process where we review the policies, the local policies, on a regular basis, so we will never get caught again with policies that were written in 1978 and nobody has revisited. So all policies should be reviewed on an ongoing basis, not every single month, but like every 3 months or every quarter or something. We would have someone say, this month we're reviewing these 3 policies, there's no changes, fine, they stay, or we're recommending deletion or addition to this policy, but it's an ongoing process. Never, policies should be updated all the time. And that would be another function that somebody's going to need to stay on top of.
Absolutely right. And you're talking about the role of Dr. Ron Stroud in
Yes, thank you.
institutional
I couldn't
effectiveness.
remember his name.
Yeah. Absolutely right. It is important. And this has been a learning experience for Cabinet as well, is to look at these policies and thinking, So with the work and the partnering with TASB, much of that accuracy will be covered by them. They will make sure that we're still aligning with the law. But what you're talking about, Dr. Graham, is internally, if we say, you know, to get this process taken care of, contact this office, or do this, or do that. And so if we change our processes, yes, and as roles change and the organizational chart shifts or people come and go, absolutely, we do need to bring these back to you all possibly for modification. And if not, we at least need to be reviewing them internally to ensure that everything is correct. You're absolutely right.
And that, you know, that we've got it on record that they were reviewed at some point by the board.
Yes.
You know, so,
Yes.
and the reason I was bringing him up is because from what I've heard is he's very service-oriented. When somebody needs help with a policy, he's able to dig it out from wherever. I know that that won't be the case now because they can find them themselves, but, you know, sometimes it's hard to figure out, do we have a policy on that? You know, which one would it be? Because there's.
Exactly. And we've worked with Dr. Giron's division, with the webmaster, to add this search box to make it even easier for folks, because, you know, the concern was, well, you needed to know that 6 or 8-digit number to find the policy. Well, people say, I don't know that number, but I want to see that procedure on evaluations or on grievances. And so the IT division has helped us by adding that search box, which has made a world of difference.
Is there anything that TASB says that if you don't upgrade your policies by a certain date, that they automatically are?
Interesting question. We have recently received a notification of an update. Most of those policies are in the legal world, and so they're already in the portal. There are a couple local policies that will need the board's attention. One of them will be coming to you later this month. You've already approved the policy, but it has since been updated. In those cases where there's an update, TASB recommends that the board adopt within 4 months.
So TASB themselves come and tells us what we need to do to keep them up. So they don't automatically, we're
Not
never
with the
gonna have
locals.
something that's out of date.
Right, with the locals, they will provide that information to us. We in turn provide it to you, and then it's up to the board to decide what they want to do.
As long as TASB approves it, or?
So they're providing the recommended update.
Okay.
And to be honest, I haven't had this conversation with them, but I will. What happens if the board says, no, we like this old version of this policy?
That was my next question.
If it's a local one, it's the board's decision. If it's a legal, then
Right.
legal would be pressed for convincing us to go against something that's
No,
already.
the legals are not coming to you all.
Yeah.
So,
The local does become, and we've had situations where the board says, no, we like it the way we have it. And TASB recommends, no, it should be this way, you know, and this is the reason why. And the board reviews it again, talks to legal, and it's a local one. They stick by their guns and say, no, we want it the way it is.
And at that point, I think we own the policy, right?
Yes.
If we don't go with the recommendation, then TASB will say, that's your decision. You're an independent body, and you could adopt it, reject it. But if you reject it, then we won't have the ability to go back and hold them accountable if we don't take the recommendation from TASB.
Yeah, there's no
Correct.
sense in having an association with them if we're not gonna take their recommendation.
That's correct.
and there's only the one policy that you all have approved that you all will see again later this month. They have provided the crosswalk of here are the changes that we've made in this update, and here's why we're making these changes, to help guide you in your decision-making.
Well, good job, Dr. Penny.
Okay.
Are we
So-
at a point where we can take a quick break? We have to celebrate a birthday, and she's leaving, so we have to make sure.
Oh, I am on your time, so absolutely we can take a break.
Because she's gonna be leaving in a few minutes, so we gotta make sure she gets
Okay.
the cake. And
I have some additional questions, but I'm cool with the break.
And I'm not done with you all either, so.
Don't
But
leave
yes, we
Dr.
can take a
Penley.
break.
Are you going to do the question after the break?
Yeah,
Oh, that's-
yes, that's good.
I think we're ready
Thank
for a
you.
break now.
I thought you said you had a question before the
I
break.
do.
No, after.
Oh, after. Okay.
Pink one's for the judge.
That pink one for the Pam, let the record show that Ms. Berlin has left the meeting.
And also, we'd like to note that Ms. Nahara arrived at 1:26 and has been here.
Okay, all right. And we'll start off after the break with the question from Ms. Sanchez.
Yes, hi, thank you. Sorry, so I guess for my information, so it's a lot of information. I really appreciate this whole effort and this exercise. I know it's tedious, and for myself, I'll speak for myself, I think that there's just a lot to kind of absorb. And so, from what are you looking for, like in terms of some direction or feedback, or how can we help you? Because for me right now, I'll tell you that, you know, to do that cross comparison and to be able to say, it makes sense, I want to keep this one, or no, let's go with TASB. I'm not at that point yet, and I feel as a board member, I need a little bit more guidance and maybe some direction and a recommendation in terms of an evaluation of what you all have gone through or seen or experienced, and maybe bringing that forward. I mean, for me, I can give you general direction in terms of bring us back a final evaluation on what you want, and I feel comfortable with that, but I wasn't sure if there was something else that you were seeking.
Good question, and it's hard to shift your perspective. I've been living TASB for quite some time, and so I am very comfortable speaking the language of TASB. What I am hoping for would be recommendations, but that would require almost a knee-jerk or just a gut reaction from you all collectively to say, yes, this feels, for example, Table 4, yes, it feels right to convert these. But that's a big decision, and there are 6 trustees here that need to be comfortable with this decision. So going back to the very beginning, Table 1, which are the locals that you're seeing, Table 2, which are the legals, which they are what they are, those are I think, pretty easy. Where I need to make sure I understand the board's will is Table 3 and Table 4, these ones in the fuzzy category. And it may be that you need a little bit more time to think about it. And if there's a board workshop in the future, or if there's a board retreat, or if you say, you know what, we're ready, bring it back as an agenda item in a regular meeting. My recommendations, and many times the recommendations of my cabinet colleagues, are provided in that table. So if you're asking for my recommendations, I would say the policies in Table 3 can be deleted. With the caveat that Dr. Graham pointed out, that we maintain that content somewhere else, so we don't just lose the content. My recommendation for the information in Table 4 is that we do work with Scott Hulse and with TASB to create some college-specific local policies. The caveat is what the judge brought up, is now we're possibly deviating and possibly opening us up to some unfortunate consequences down the road by having a specific policy. Again, these are big decisions. You may not be comfortable guiding me today, and that's fine.
But I think you're headed in the right direction. As far as I'm concerned, I'm comfortable with your, recommendation that we consider taking this off, deleting them, and keeping them somewhere else just in case they were needed. Because it's a big undertaking, but we gotta move forward to clean up our policies, and I think we're headed in the right direction.
And again, one way or another, all of these policies, everything listed in the left-hand column of every one of these tables, they will go away one way or another.
You caught my attention when you said big consequence. Now, tell me if we do something where we don't go along with, what is the
So for example, with Table 4, because that's what's on the screen right now, if you say, you know what, we really believe this policy needs to be maintained, we create an EPCC-specific policy, and remember, those are the ones where TASB says that that's your prerogative. We will not, we will guide you through the writing of them, but we are not vetting them. We are not standing behind them to the extent that we do a cookie cutter local policy, if you will, or a legal policy. So we would really need to work closely with Scott Hulse, with TASB Legal, to ensure that everything is viable at the beginning. And then, as Dr. Graham was mentioning, it will be up to the board, with Cabinet's help, to continue to review and revise their policies, even after these are all approved. These are not one and done.
So what you're telling me is that the consequence is that if we go with the cookie cutter, TASB covers it for us legally? Is that?
That is our, and we do have a question that Scott Hulse and I are both going to follow up with, but yes, that is the message from TASB, is if we adopt their templates with minimum changes, then.
We're covered. All right.
And I think, quite frankly, from a local perspective, that it may make better sense to keep it as a local policy because of the whatever individualized needs of the organization versus going with perhaps a more general format that TASB provides. And so I think it's worth going through that exercise, as you indicated that you all will be doing, to flesh that out and to make it as tight as possible and put the organization in a better position with its policies. So I'm okay with that, to deviate from that TASB approach, so.
Dr. Penley, could we have a word on the timeframe, just to make clear? Because there's still policies that are going to be presented to the board in the next couple of months. And in speaking with Ms. Marin and Dr. Penley, it's a lot of information that admittedly we're throwing your way. So I think the thought process would be to continue doing what we're doing now, continuing to provide you proposed policies for your review and approval. And I think it may be helpful for the board, and that's the other thing I think that we wanted to discuss to make sure we're all on the same page and get the appropriate guidance, is to leave all of these issues until the end of the vetting process. And that way, if there's still any obsolete, outdated policies after the approval of all the existing policies, we could just come back at you in either one future meeting in the early fall, I think, and say, well, everything that we feel is outdated, it's been deleted, or we were able to wedge it in an existing TASB policy, or we were able to find a way to put it in a procedure, or these are X policies as we've discussed them for your review, not covered by TASB or elsewhere, and these are new policies that we would want to get your review and approval.
I think that's an excellent way for us to get together again, maybe, again, just to go through that and just say, okay, we're done with this, or even the ones that you're bringing to the board for approval, that those are coming to us for approval so we can read them, first reading, second reading, and then move on. But that way we would have the differentiated, the ones that we're looking at for deletion versus the ones that we're looking at for approval. Because I certainly will focus more on the ones we're looking for approval versus the ones that you're saying, we can delete this, because I'll be trusting that you've already talked to your colleagues and you're all in agreement, we don't need this, it's gonna sit somewhere else in another policy, and we just do away with it.
So to rephrase what Mr. Ortega said. We would continue the sequence and flow that you all have been seeing for the last few months. The last set of local policies that will be presented for your review will be in July for first reading and August for possible adoption. So then, as soon as September, I can present the policies that will be ready for deletion, which is Table 2. And that would also give us some time to work with Scott Hulse and TASB to see, can we address some of these other policies in Tables 3 and 4?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so my last point is Table 5. Okay. Table 5 is a summary of your bylaws. Most of your bylaws have already been replaced with the TASB policies, mostly in Category B, local governance, but some in Category A. So other than the hard copy in your binder, the bylaws no longer exist. But there are a few sections in the bylaws that, again, did not have a TASB counterpart. So those I highlighted in red for you. Similar issue to what you saw in Table 3 and Table 4. Are those sections of the bylaws important enough that we need to keep them in a local X policy? Or are they fine being deleted? And again, we're not asking for immediate input today if you're not comfortable giving it, but I just wanted to let you know that there are some pieces of the bylaws that did not carry over. So that is all I had for you this afternoon. Any other questions, suggestions, guidance?
So my only question would be, so let's say we delete this, where would that information rest, the bylaws?
The information in red in Table 5 right now is nowhere, other than an archived copy of the bylaws. They're not in a TASB policy.
Right, but like the mission and vision and goals, they're all over the place in the website and different documents.
Exactly, exactly. So this may be analogous to something that was a policy back in the day that maybe no longer serves the purpose of being a policy. So for that example, with the purpose statement, where the bylaws listed the mission, vision, and goals, we do have that information somewhere else. That may not be necessary as a policy.
I think it's on a strategic plan or something like that, Dr. Serrata. It's somewhere. And like the one that talks about titles, 1.3010, what was that one about?
So you have a copy of the bylaws in your packet, and the section on titles says the board shall elect one of its members as chair of the board, one as vice chair of the board, one as secretary of the board.
Okay.
And that's
got it.
all it says.
Yeah, I think as long as we've got no need for it, we should do away with it.
Any other questions that I can answer for the board at this time?
Guess we'll see you in July.
I'm sorry?
We'll see you in July.
Yes, July and August.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you for your patience. This has been quite a heavy lift for you, and I appreciate your diligence. And I think that's it then, right?
Okay, Pam, let's go ahead and read 4.2.
Item 4.2, Ms. Josette Shaughnessy, Vice President of Financial and Administrative Operations, will provide an update on the budget development process for fiscal year 2021 to 2022.
Testing. I want to make sure this I can advance. Good afternoon, Chair Haggerty, Dr. Sedata, members of the board, and my colleagues that are sitting back there, and hopefully I don't put anybody to sleep. I know this is usually the time of the afternoon where everybody's kind of tired of a long day, so I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. This is a fairly comprehensive presentation. I will try not to go too fast, and certainly please interrupt me if there are any questions, because we're going to be covering quite a bit of information here. I'm a little too close to the microphone. So the purpose of this afternoon's presentation is to kind of brief you on a very preliminary budget for next fiscal year. And this is the time of the year we come before you and try to kind of give you some information on revenues, expenses, so on and so forth. And as we say, you know, every year it's always a little challenging, but since I've been here, I cannot remember of a more challenging year. I probably have said that over and over, but even more so this year because of all this federal funding that we are receiving. And tremendous responsibility, as I've mentioned before, in terms of obviously allocating those funds in the most responsible manner for the college. So the agenda is going to cover very briefly the budget development process for next year, the strategic planning that we had to do, as we always do, but certainly more so this past few years when state funding has been a little bit more challenging, when we've had obviously the pandemic that hit us last March. We're going to have a review of the federal funds. I know that in your packet you have quite a bit of information, and certainly I hope you had a chance to look at it, but I will be glad to go over very specifically on these federal awards and the planning for allocation of federal awards. And I know this was mentioned at the April board meeting, where there was a request, say, you know, how about seeing what you intend to do with those funds? And certainly it's going to be very preliminary, because at the time, if you recall, we just did not know. Number one, we had not received the money yet. And then we had very little guidance on how we can use those funds. So certainly we've had an update since we've printed this. And I know you've probably already been briefed on it, but we're going to give you a little bit more information. And then past the allocation of federal awards, we're going to discuss the projected revenue for this year, where we stand, and where we stand on the expenditure budget, and how well we are doing. And we're doing well, by the way. So wanted to kind of wanted to put your mind at ease here. We're doing very well. And then we'll talk about the projected revenue for next year and the preliminary budget, based on the baseline budget, and then our next steps. So really quickly, as always, the budget development process always starts with budget workshops with the budget head. These are administered by Ms. Laura Teges, who's our Director of Budget, and also her staff who assist her. We started those in February 2021. They were virtual. They were all virtual, and so, you know, we've adjusted to the situation. At that point, right prior to spring break, the budget requests were completed by the executive levels, and they were submitted to the budget office. This is the time also where our executive levels have a chance to review the budget, and it can also reallocate funds within their own area. The budget requests were compiled by the budget office to generate a baseline budget. And the baseline budget, you're going to see in a little while, is always different from the adopted budget for a variety of reasons, but mostly because during the fiscal year, we have retirements, we have resignation, and when those positions are vacated, the budget is adjusted down to reflect the highest level in the entry level for that position. We met with vice presidents, with the vice presidents over to review their respective budgets. Same thing, that was done online and well done. We communicated very well. At least I think we communicated very well. The preliminary budget is always reviewed with Dr. Sedata, and we also brief him on revenue projections and what it looks like for next year. Then this is the first of the budget workshops that is delivered to the Board of Trustees. And so May 14th is actually exactly a year ago that we did have our budget workshop last year in May. And we briefed you on all kinds of different things last year in May. This is where also the time that we received the first of federal funding was the CARES, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So we anticipate having another budget workshop to update you on many revenue sources. All main revenue sources are going to be affected, and we'll do that at the end of July, most likely. I think that Pam will be polling you to see what is the best time for you all to listen to that presentation. And by the end of July, we're going to have an updated, certified property evaluation. We'll know where we stand with the state. Right now, the legislative session is still going on, and it's probably ready to wrap up very soon. And of course, tuition. So tuition is very much dependent on our enrollment, and we are certainly very anxious to see how summer enrollment pans out, because that is really the precursor for the fall enrollment. And so right now, we are still working on bringing those numbers up. But I just got a text from VP Gonzalez, who is asking for an additional round of funding because we are actually exhausting the CARES fund allocation, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Also, during our June-July timeframe, we're going to be reviewing all those additional requests. During the budget development process, the vice president turn in their additional requests that are critical for their operation. And so we'll be reviewing those, and I'll talk about that in a little while too. And then finally, August, we wrap up the budget, and it has to be adopted by the board by August 31st. So then we're done, and then we start a new fiscal year. So a lot of work to be done between now and August. So what are we looking at for this fiscal year revenues? That's the basis for, obviously, the revenue projections. We don't move forward the revenue projections from the current fiscal year. We actually look at our actual revenue that are collected, and that is the basis for next year's revenue. We also have to take into consideration this next fiscal year is the first year of the new biennium. And this is, of course, the time that we are looking at our state appropriation. The budget for next year is going to be based on a rollover budget. We don't just look at our preliminary budget and say, okay, we're going to cut here and cut there. No, we really don't do that unless it's absolutely necessary, which, if you remember, last year we had to do that. So just to give you a little bit of just a refresher, when you adopted this year's budget, in order to balance the budget, because we had such a drastic decrease in enrollment, therefore a drastic decrease in tuition, and also potentially in property tax collection, we had to reduce the budget by quite a bit of money, quite a few $1 million, if you remember. We had to freeze position to over the tune of over $6 million. We also froze travel, and we decreased the travel budget by $1 million, which bode well because we really could not go anywhere anyway, right? So, but just to refresh your memory, the baseline budget still includes that. So we have frozen position of the tune of $6 million that are not in this preliminary budget, in this baseline budget. We still do not have a travel budget of 1.2 like we used to have in the past. Now, just as a reminder, travel is not for the sake of traveling. It's to obviously attend conferences, training sessions. But the virtual environment certainly has helped us, still being able to network and train on very essential operations. I mentioned additional requests. Right now, we're only looking at essential needs, okay? No wish list. Okay, we're going to be vetting those. And of course, critical services, anything dealing with safety, anything dealing, obviously, with student support, anything dealing with overhead costs. We don't have a choice. If our utility bills goes up, we don't have a chance to protest that, right? I mean, we can protest it all we want. That is the rate. Benefits is another area of the budget that we always have to look at because we are very much dependent on state funding for our health insurance and our retirement. Those are the two big budgets that we have in our benefits. And you've seen that in your packet when you look at the chart for benefits. Half of that benefits budget is health insurance to the tune of about $7.9 million. So that's a lot of money. And then, of course, every year we just do the best we can to look at a salary enhancement package for our staff, because it is important for us. We want to retain our employees. We want to make sure that they are compensated the way they should. And even if they are not, at least we do the best we can to continue that practice, to look at a salary enhancement. If you recall, for this fiscal year, the board did not approve. We did not propose a salary enhancement because we just could not afford it. And so it has happened in those period of time. It does not happen very often, but it does happen. So in planning strategically for next year's budget, so again, I talked about planning for revenue, state appropriation. What are we looking at? Well, I think you're already aware that we are looking right now, you probably already have been briefed by Dr. Serrata, we are looking at worst case scenario, as far as we know. Of course, things could always change, right, Dr. Serrata? They could always change. But right now, the House bill is showing a decrease over the 2021 biennium. Well, both bills actually showing a decrease. But the House bill is really the worst case scenario. So it's about, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, about $1.4 million less over the biennium than the previous biennium. Tuition and fees continue to be based on the tuition rate schedule that was effective fall of 2020. So we're going to be entering the second year of our cycle for our tuition schedule. In 22, that will be in 22, that's when we'll be reconsidering we'll be looking at another cycle of increasing our tuition rate. Property taxes. So property taxes in the past, fairly predictable. In the past 2 to 3 years, we've really have struggled to come up with a number that is fairly accurate by the time that I present to you. But let me tell you, things have changed so drastically, mostly because of this Chapter 42 that has been included in the tax bill, that basically the property valuation, when they are certified, do not include any disputed valuations that are really under Chapter 42 of the code. And so therefore, we're always trying to figure out how we're going to balance that out. And the reason why those are not included, because they are disputed, they are under litigation, and they are subject to refunds. So that's the reason why they are not included in the valuation. However, when the tax bill go out in October, those valuations are included in there. So it creates a little bit of challenge, and I'll talk about that in just a minute when I talk about the revenue we're anticipating for this year. Major reappraisal year, I'm sure you're already aware, probably maybe your own homes valuations have gone up, and you have gone to the Central Appraisal District, have protested them, because you certainly don't agree with a major increase in residential property. And that is going to create quite a few protests. So the CAD expects about 35,000 protests this year. And some of that will end up in litigation, and especially your commercial property. So your very large commercial property, I'm talking about, your major retail companies, the fountains. We're talking here about potentially the outlet mall, the refining, not Western Refining, but the refining company. So again, we have to account for those. And as you know, I've always been very conservative in planning for that property tax revenue. I talked about planning additional funding needs, and I talked about that already, so I'll just move on. We continue to evaluate the impact of GASB 68 and 75. This is the unfunded liability for health insurance and retirement. And so those are always has a strong impact on the unrestricted net position, also known as unrestricted fund balance. So we commonly call the fund balance. And we say every year, well, we hope it's going to be kind of flat, it's going to plateau, but we always have surprises every year, especially in the health insurance. The health insurance, ERS has not planned, or had not planned to have a big reserve fund or invested a very large amount, just like TRS has done. So we always have some surprises in continuing implementing GASB 75. So we won't know that until usually the end of the fiscal year, how it's impacting our fund balance. And then, of course, the last thing we need to plan for is the allocation of federal funding under the CARES, CARISA, and ARPA. Which brings us to this slide. And I know this is rather busy, but at least this is a summary of all the funding that we have been receiving. We are slated to receive, especially under the ARPA. Everything else, we already have gotten the authorization to draw down. So what you see here is on the rows that you see under the first column that indicates the kind of award that we received, and then the effective date. And at the time of printing this, the effective date is correct, but then the approved extended end date has changed. Because as we know, things change, especially with the federal government, right? Especially when they have just enacted a new law and they're still trying to work out the kinks. And so just to give you an example, under ARPA that you see at the bottom of this page, it was pending at the time of printing this, and we were slated to receive about a little bit over $63 million. And at the time that I presented to you all in April, the end date was going to be December of 2024. Yes, sir.
Okay. Quick question. When you're talking about funds that say we're receiving, does that mean that we actually physically take possession of the money, or if we now have the right to write checks on account somewhere, or do we actually have that money?
We do not actually have the money. We have the authorization to spend the money. So
Okay.
as we incur expenses, we can draw down against that
Okay, so
award.
we actually have a balance somewhere as
Yes.
opposed, so when you say we received the money, no, we received the rights to allocate against the
Exactly.
fund.
Yes, sir. I stand corrected. In other words,
Well, that's a
obviously,
shame, because
we don't get, and especially under ARPA, they're very specific. You cannot draw down a huge sum of money without a very good reason. So we have to have expended the money in order to draw down those funds. Is that correct, Mr. Flores?
It would have been nice if they'd give us the money, because then we could earn interest on it while it waits.
Actually, we cannot on federal funds. We cannot earn money on federal funds. We have to actually return it if we do earn any
Well,
interest.
That sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have to return the,
Anyway,
we can't make
there's
money.
a balance, so really we have rights to,
Correct. We get what they call a notice of award, and we get an authorization to draw down as we expand. And we have some restriction, by the way. Some of these funds, we have like on the CARISA, and I think on the ARPA, I think we're going to have a 90-day period since the date of award that we should draw something. They don't want that money to sit idle, okay? Because it's already reserved. The federal government has it reserved. They can't just kind of,
haven't printed it yet.
Yeah. So anyway, but here what you see is three pots of money, three major pots of money, because within within three of those, there's also another component of that funding, which is for minority serving institutions, the MSI funding. So, for example, under the CARES, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act, we received $8.2 million to be expended for student aid, which, by the way, has been fully expended. We also received the other portion for the other half, which was $8.2 million for institutional needs, and we're working on expanding that. And we also received under MSI a little bit over $1 million. And this was back in May of 2020. And at the time, we had until this May to expend the money. And then we got a cost extension. We had a no-cost extension, a no-cost extension. And then since CARISA has been enacted in December of 2020, that has been extended. It was extended to January of 22, so we had more time. And now that ARP has been enacted, they've changed for all of these awards to have an end date of May of 2022 with the option to have a no-cost extension. So remember when I presented to you and I said, ARPA, we should have all the money expended by 24. Well, now they're saying, no, you need to have the money expended by at the soonest 2022 and May of 2022, and then you could have a no-cost extension to May 2023. Now, that is not set in stone. We know that could change again. Yes, Mr. Exner?
What kind of extension?
It's called a no-cost extension. In other words, we can request an extension without costing us anything. Is that right? So, when we look at CARES, we got a total of a little bit over $17.6 million. Y'all can see that? Let me make sure here. Right here. And then when we look at CARISA, so CARISA, under the student aid, they actually matched the CARES. It was a supplemental award, and they matched that. So that was another $8.2 million, almost $8.3 million. And we got an additional $27.9 million, almost $28 million. We also got under an MSI this additional here, $9,600, an additional $1.9 million. And so a total under CARISA over $38.2 million. Now, at the time of printing this, what was pending is a potential $63.5 million. And so when I presented it to you, we said, well, we still haven't received the authorization for that money, and so it's really hard to plan, but we hope to get some additional guidance. So really, for a total of $119 million, that is a lot of money for us. So the next slide, I'm sorry, did I skip a slide? I did.
I have a question, Josette.
Yes, sir.
On that, those funds that are left, the 119, are there any restrictions on all that money, or?
Yes, sir. I am going to show that. This next slide here tells you where we can spend the money.
Okay, thank you.
So absolutely. So what this shows here is under the student, anything that is student-related, well, anything that was allocated for student, we cannot spend on anything but for student. However, anything that was allocated for institutional, we can use some of that money for student. So we cannot use the student allocation for institutional, but we can do the reverse. So for example, here what you see is to show you where we're at with all these awards and how much has been expended as of April the 30th, and then the balance available. And again, remember that the ARP at the time was still very estimated. So for example, under student cares, we had an award of 8.3. We expended 8.3, and this was mostly done for our students who were for the spring, summer, and fall of 2020, and the remainder for spring of 2021. We also allocated some money from the institutional side of CARES to go against students. To help our students. So, but your student cares had to go only direct student aid. And by the way, it had to be distributed directly to them. We could not say, well, only if you register, well, only, we can apply it against your tuition. We had to actually give them, the money was going directly to them. Now, there were some requirements, of course. They had to be Title IV eligible students. And then with the rest of all this funding, actually, the law evolved that allowed us to actually give us a little bit more flexibility, which type of students could actually receive the aid. For example, under CARISA and under ARPA, I think it's under ARPA, not CARISA. ARPA actually is covering all students that were actually enrolled as of spring of 2020. Is that correct? So that includes your dreamers, that includes your foreign students. So there was a whole lot more flexibility with the ARPA. For CARISA had one component for student only, 8.3 million. We could not spend that on anything else but direct student aid. One small difference here with CARISA, we could actually apply the money against any debt that was incurred as of March 13, 2020. And we are in the process of looking at that, trying to get some guidance, because on the one hand, they say, yes, you can cover the student debt. On the other hand, they say, but you still have to have the student's authorization to do so. Okay, so we are looking at the guidance to make sure we understand that and we apply it without, we don't want to get in trouble, for not doing it correctly. So we still have that available right now because we are getting ready to distribute it. As we speak, actually, the $8.2 million is being distributed. is being distributed to our summer student right now, and then we'll move on with some going to the fall 2021 student, and then the remaining balance will go to the spring 2021 student. Based on the demand, we actually can allocate money from the Carissa institutional to our students, should the demand be larger than we expect, and we know it is larger than we expect. So that institutional care. So institutional cares, this is the pot of money that is available for the costs that are related to the transition to online instruction, any kind of student aid if we want to, any protective personal equipment, your PPE, and then lost revenue. So that is really the nice flexibility here. As you know, we had tremendous loss of tuition because of a decrease in enrollment. It affected tuition, fees like vehicle registration, like commissions on obviously all your food and beverage vendors, which really help us, sustain that auxiliary fund. A variety of distance education fee that was waived, that has been waived now since last summer. So we're talking here about some significant funds here that are available to recover some of that lost revenue. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm looking at this and I'm saying that on institutional cares, it covers lost revenue, and then CRRSA covers lost revenue, and then MSI cares covers lost revenue, and the supplement calls this revenue, and again, all of this lost revenue. Do the rules change for how they define lost revenue, or do they just allow it? Does a time frame, or I don't understand.
There is a time frame. Yes.
And how do they,
So that is, and it's a very good question, Mr. Axel. You figure, okay, how do we demonstrate that lost revenue, right? So that's why we have Mr. Flores, because he is really good at developing estimates and trends. And so the federal government, if they were to audit us, they're going to be looking how we derive that lost revenue. So they're going to be looking at the way we looked at it. So we did trends over 3 years, and then we kind of average that, and then we compare that with the spring or the fall. And then we're able to actually put a number to that because it is directly related. I mean, you can see the drastic drop between those trends over the last 3 years and then the actual that we actually collected in the fall of 2020, well, actually the summer of 2020, then the fall of 2020, the spring of 2021, and beyond. Because, if this continues, right now, we'll be happy if we break even with this year. We'll be happy if our enrollment pans out to the same as this year, because this is the basis for our budget, right? But we still can claim those lost revenue year after year if they don't go back to what they were pre-pandemic. And so that's what the federal government looks at.
So our lost revenue really is the tuition that we would have seen if we hadn't been hit with
Yes, sir.
what we project.
Exactly that.
Can we project increase in, just out of curiosity, did you project increase in student load next year because we're doing such a fantastic job that over the next 3 years we're going to grow in enrollment, and so we actually had greater loss in revenue?
No,
Not yet.
Okay.
no, sir, we did not. We're looking at historical numbers and trends, and so.
So we're saying that we're not ever going to grow, so
No,
we
we're
can't
not.
claim more.
Well, we're being conservative. But obviously, the next model you're going to see, that's what's very preliminary, because it's going to evolve. It's going to change. It has to be fluid. We've got to be able to look at, what is happening with our enrollment. And that's something that we have discussed. If our enrollment pans out higher and goes back to pre-pandemic, we cannot claim any lost revenue. We truly understand that because we will not be able to demonstrate that.
Question, Dr.
Yes, sir.
Serrata, do you have any problem being very aggressive and then explaining to the government next year why we didn't achieve quite as much as we want?
I have no problem being aggressive. What we're seeing, Mr. Uxer, is, quite frankly, unfortunately, we had a significant portion of the class of 2020 that was lost with the enrollment across the state, not just in El Paso. And right now, we're in danger of losing the class of 2021. We will be, and we'll be bringing a recommendation to the board on the 26th of this month with regards to a return to campus for board approval based on the data. And if the data continues in the direction it is, then our expectation is that we will offer 50% of our courses, as the board actually approved already, we'll be offering 50% of our courses face-to-face and 50% online for the fall. And we know, just based on the enrollment trends, that there's a desire to be back to face-to-face from our students. And so we are gearing up to head in that direction. We are already offering the courses, but we'll ask the Board of Trustees to approve our plan for a return to campus, a phased return to campus based on the data that we've been measuring. I have no issue, and the staff knows how aggressive we need to be with regards to enrollment.
I was just thinking, I would have no problem projecting 30,000 this next year and 31,000 the next year, and then lost revenue is whatever it is under the 31,000. And then if we don't reach it, we'll then tell the feds they have to figure out, they have to come and get it if they want it back.
No, I think Ms. Shaughnessy has, her and Mr. Flores have put together a very sound plan with regards to lost revenue. And you think about tuition and fees, in particular fees, our distance learning fees, we waived upwards of $6 million in fees because students didn't have a choice whether to take distance learning. So that will, from the 13th of May of March of last year, going forward, we can claim lost revenue. And so we will move forward with that. And again, I think they've done a great job of establishing a plan that will need to be, that will change, obviously, as we go forward. If enrollment ends up being larger than we anticipate, and that is the hope, then we'll adjust. But it is a 3-year average, and so even if it were to go up significantly, the average of that 3 years would still be down based on 2020. So we'll still be able to claim lost revenue.
And we certainly are very cognizant of having a very sound estimates, because when we are audited, we need to be very consistent the way that we obviously claim that lost revenue. We can just be changing methodology like this unless there is really a good reason. So we will continue monitoring that. So when we look at what we have expended to date, under the various awards, we have expended to date a little bit over $15 million out of $119 million estimated, because the $119 million does include the ARPA. And so the balance that is available, including the ARPA, is about a little bit over $104 million. Now that we know how much we've been authorized to spend on the ARPA, which, by the way, the latest is a total of $62,889,441. So that was the authorized amount. Part of that is for the student, which is a little bit over half, $31,907,525, so 31.9 basically. And then the remainder to the institutional, about $30.9 million, almost $31 million also. So quite a bit of money here coming in that we need to plan for. And so in really looking at, do you have any question about this slide? Is that pretty understandable? Any question? You can see, let me tell you, let me give you a point to this. So back in May, when we were granted the CARES award, we could not use that against lost revenue. Only the MSI was allowed to use against lost revenue. So here what you see under the MSI CARES line, right here, we actually expanded that, and we drew down everything we could, because at the time we did not know that CARISA was going to change all of this. So CARISA originally also said, you cannot claim any lost revenue prior to the enactment of the law. So we could not claim any revenue, for example, for the fall tuition, which was $3 million, something like that. We could not do any of that. And then here comes, additional guidance that says, oh, no, it's retroactive now to March 13, 2020. So obviously a big sign of relief here, because now we're able to claim, we can go back to 2020 and actually recoup that lost revenue that we had in the summer. We had some continuing education tuition that we lost, vehicle registration fee, distance education fee that we waived, and then the entire fall of tuition, same thing in terms of vehicle registration fee, which is the largest collection that we do for vehicle registration fee that really supports so many things in terms of vehicle registration and certainly helps Chief Ramirez fund those kind of needs. So definitely, Chief Ramirez was very happy about that because, imagine you're trying to dip into the fund balance to cover your needs. So again, this is to show you how the legislation has really evolved and changed drastically to really help those institutions that have suffered losses. Yes, Mr. Uxer.
Looking at this, it says that right now, it looks like we have a balance of $27.3 million for the CRSAA account.
Yes, sir.
And in the previous slide, it says supplemental award A, and it approved end date of 1/15/22. Is that still a valid date?
So that has changed too.
Okay.
So now it's the May of 22.
Okay, so we have until, we have about 1 year to use up that $27 million.
That is with potentially 2 years because we also can ask for a no-cost extension.
Oh, okay, so we don't have to, okay.
That's right.
Okay.
So that is, so you see how it is hard to have an allocation plan because the rules tend to change. But we certainly have tried to be as, you'll see the next plan actually shows through January of 22 because at the time we did not know the dates had changed again. So you're going to see in the next slide how that preliminary allocation plan is allowing for spending the funds by the required end date, because we don't want to return any money to the federal government if we don't have to, right? So, any more question about this? Let me see, is there anything else that I want to add here? Unless you have any question, I'll just move on to the next slide. So, we know this is very busy. It is very busy. We try to put it on 2 slides because it shows a progression of that allocation. And again, I want to credit Mr. Flores for putting this structure together. Imagine having to account for quite a few, thank you. I can see it much better, thank you. So trying to account for all these different requirements on these various pots of money, okay? And we tried to reflect this on the slide the most concise way that we could. So I am going to take some time explaining, and certainly I don't want to insult your intelligence. I mean, if you already understand it, that's great, but I just want to go over maybe explain, let's say, the first top row. So you have, for example, the title. Now, this allocation plan, preliminary, remember this is before we knew about the different rules, the new guidance, the end dates, the amount of money we got from ARP. And so that covers fiscal years, this current fiscal years, 2021, all the way to December of 2024. So it's really spanning about 3 fiscal years, okay? The very top rows, it's showing, the first column shows you, the restricted uses, the award period, ending dates, the award amount. So right across, all those pots of money are color-coded. Mr. Flores knows that, some people are more visual than others, and it kind of stands out, right? So the red, it means you're actually very, very favorable for our students. So what we have in red here is the pots of money that are benefiting students 100%. So that money cannot be allocated to anything else but for student aid. So you have the CARES and you have the CARISA. And those dates have changed. So now CARES, if we had not spent that money, by the way, that first pot of money, we still would have technically until January the 15th, 2022. So now CARISA, here, even though it shows January 15, 2022, now it is May of 2022, potentially going to be extended. In green, you see the MSI CARES, and this is a separate pot of money. And right now for MSI CARES, that is dedicated to all 3 uses. So those three uses, by the way, are identified in that first column where you see uses, 3 main components. So student aid, lost revenue, and institutional. So institutional costs, the ones that I've mentioned earlier. So any costs associated with transition to online instruction, any cost, obviously, for our faculty, training, technology, then we have PPE, and also student aid. We put here infrastructure because at the time we did not know really what that meant, but we put it there just in case. Right now, we don't have any money allocated for infrastructure, although you could consider anything that we spend for technology infrastructure is infrastructure. So, although right now it is included in institutional. And then you have the CARES, CARISA, also all three uses. At the time of this printing, it was expiring. It had to be spent by the 15th of January, 2022. We are authorized at $36.2 million. And then under ARPA, that's the latest. And that is, you have a section that is all three uses. At the time, it was 50-50. And we know now it's a little bit higher for the student than it is for institutional. So you can see how this money is actually, you can see the total amount of the award. ARPA, MSI, we don't know. So we have heard, originally it was $3 billion that had been allocated for institution under the MSI, and lately we have heard it's $2.6 billion, and we have not heard how much this institution is going to be getting. So as soon as we do hear, you'll be informed. So any question on those first three rows? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but there's certainly nothing that if you want me to expand, I certainly can. The second section then shows so far the amounts that have been expended under each pot of money, and then the funds that are available after you take away those expenses from the award amount, from the beginning balance. Okay, so the award amount is basically your beginning balance, okay, that very top row. So that very top row is really your beginning balance over here, except, of course, for those we know that has changed. It's pretty close, actually. That 31.5 is very close to what we actually have been authorized. This whole section over here represents what has been expended under each pot of money. So under the CARES, the original CARES student aid, we have expended everything. As of January of 2021, we expended everything. So therefore, you show a zero balance here. Under CARISA, we still have $8.2 million that we are slated to expend very soon, or a good portion of it anyway. MSI CARES, even though we received $3 million, we've already expended $1,041,000, and this was against lost revenue. Okay, so now we have a balance of $1.9 million. Under the CARES/CARISA, we were authorized almost $3 million, and this is how much we have spent as of April. So we did allocate some from that pot of money to supplement the spring 2021 registration to help our student. That was also a base year, so we want to make sure we also kind of increased our enrollment. That was very critical, we did that. And then we also allocated some lost revenue from that pot of money that was mostly for distance ed. And then here we have $4.1 million that has been spent so far on the institutional CARES, the original CARES amount, by the way. So we still have $30.4 million left on those pots of money. The next section over here represents what we are projecting to get. This is what we were projecting to get this fiscal year. Now, why is it half of this? Is because originally the regulation said that entities would receive half of their award within 60 days of the enactment of the law, and the second half 12 months later. So you're going to see that this plan over here demonstrates exactly that. However, we got the entire award. So now we need to revise this plan Yes, sir.
Just a question, I don't want to quibble, but you say that AARP is 31.5 million, but if you look back on the other page, it says that we actually 31,750,000, so there's a difference, $250,000.
That was the original, sir. That was the
Okay.
original under the 63.5. So
Okay,
this one here
So
is,
this page right here should have read 31.5.
it should have, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And I apologize for that mistake. I did not catch that, but when everything is said and done, this actually ended up being pretty close to what we're receiving.
Yeah, I
But
understand.
certainly, yeah, exactly, you're
Okay,
exactly right.
That's fine, I just.
Well, you want to make sure. I understand. Very good eagle eye, Mr. Uxer.
I should have majored in accounting.
You can imagine trying to put all these amounts together and making sure that they all relate, and we certainly did our best to do that. But anyway, so the last section of this slide here shows now what are we projecting for fiscal year 21, for fiscal year 2021, for the rest of this fiscal year. So in this column over here, out of the $8.3 million, we are anticipating to allocate almost $5 million for the summer registration and fall registration. And we also think that we will be able to supplement if needed, if the demand is there, which we know is there. We are estimating about $6 million. Remember, this is truly the best we can do at this point to estimate. This is going to move, this is going to change based on the demand. And of course, based on reading the guidance. So what I failed to tell you is once we received the ARPA award, the authorization, we also received 26 pages of guidance, yes. Most frequently asked question, FAQs. And so Mr. Flores has been scouring through 26 pages, trying to understand what is it exactly we can use that money for. And we're also finding out that we cannot do it for capital projects, which we thought we could originally. We can do it for some minor renovation. We can do it for anything that is helping, obviously, helping us deal with the pandemic, anything that is helping us with virtual instruction, anything that is probably enhancing our technology, any broadband infrastructure expansion, internet. We're talking about possibly, smart classrooms renovation. And Dr. Rilon was asking the other day, we're going to be able to use that money to renovate our smart classroom, where there's a strong possibility we can do that. But until we really have gone through all those FAQs, we want to make sure that we first understand what that means for us. And we're going to be attending various webinars given by, the Association of Community Colleges Business Officers, by GFOA, anything from the federal government that we can attend, obviously any networking we do with our colleagues to ask them, hey, what are you doing? Because we really want to try to obviously make the best out of this funding. And certainly that does not happen. It's a good thing it does not happen all the time, because we certainly don't want to have a pandemic again if we can avoid it in our lifetime. But certainly we have tremendous responsibility and accountability. So when you look at what we are looking at, we plan to allocate, this again, very fluid. So some of these are very easy. We know we're going to be spending the rest of the CARISA student aid. So by the end of fiscal year 20, by August, we will have a balance of $3.3 million that we're going to allocate for the fall 2021. I'm sorry, we're going to allocate for the spring 2021. It will be done in the fall, but for the spring registration. So again, a plan that we have. On the MSI Cares, we plan on recouping the revenue, the additional revenue that we have not drawn down yet. So from the MSI Cares, we still had a balance of $1.9 million, and we are going to be recouping that lost revenue. So that means we'll have no more money left under the MSI Cares. Under the CARES CARISA, which is the other large pot of money, we are looking, as I said earlier, maybe allocating $6 million to student aid, Lost revenue, another $10 million, because we have not drawn down substantial revenue that we need to draw down. And then about $2 million on institutional. And again, that could be some additional, right now we have spent like $4.1 million on the institutional, and we expect to spend another $2 million. So when everything is all said and done, funds available at the end of August of this year will have about $11.7 million left under the CARES CORISA. Under ARPA, at the time, because we really don't have per se a plan, a concrete plan in place, then that money we thought was going to be awarded, half of it, would carry forward into the next fiscal year. Any question on this? I know this is a lot of information, a lot of numbers to follow. So these funds available here are going to carry forward to the next page. And we were trying to fit everything into one page so you could follow. So just keep in mind that this balance down here basically is taken into consideration in this second page of the slide. So we start 21, 22, and we anticipate to expand the entire student care under CORISA. And that was the balance that I was talking about earlier. This is going to be allocated for the spring 2022 registration. And in addition to that, we are saying, well, we could probably take about $4 million from that CARES CORISA. Remember, we can use that money for student aid. We cannot do the other way around. We cannot use student aid money for institutional, but we can use institutional for student aid, which is really bodes well for our students. We're also looking at allocating another amount to lost revenue of $6.1 million, depending on the enrollment pans out. Even if the enrollment is at the same level of this fiscal year, we still would have lost revenue. And we would claim it. Absolutely, we would claim it. And then we're looking at maybe put another $1.5 million into institutional. At this point, we have expended the CARES CORISA money. So all these pots of money here have already been expended by August 31st, 2022, except for the ARP money. The ARP money, ARPA money. So what do we want to do with that pot of money because we're trying now to make it last, right? We want to make that ARP money last, hopefully through December of 24, because at the time, that's the date that we had. Now, we're going to have to revamp this because now we're probably looking at the latest May of 23. So when we go into 21, 22, we can allocate $5.3 million to institutional, and $5.3 million to lost revenue, $2 million for institutional, and then maybe $1 million to infrastructure. Again, this has to be very fluid because we just don't know at this point exactly what we can do and cannot do. If you notice, from the student aid, we can also allocate from the student aid side of ARP, we also can allocate $7.8 million for our student aid. That would last for the entire fiscal year of 21-22. So when we look at funds available at the end of fiscal year 22, this is how much money we would have left that would carry forward to the following fiscal year, which, by the way, would be the second year of the biennium. Okay? Second year of the biennium. So the second year of the biennium, what are we looking at? Again, allocating some money from the student aid, because that's all we have left on that side, and then also allocating some money on the institutional side. So here we're looking at lost revenue. Again, this is really a very educated guess. We do the best we don't know. I mean, that could change entirely. So we could be moving from this $12 million to, let's say, institutional, because we have that flexibility. Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson.
Back to this. original page is that you have ARPA at 63.5 million.
Yes, sir.
Is that still pending?
No, sir, we already know how
Oh,
much.
so that, I mean, the word pending now, so.
Well,
you're-
at the time when we printed,
Yeah,
it
no,
was
but
pending.
now it is a firm number.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, and we're fairly confident that it won't be reduced.
As far as we know, we
Oh,
have the
okay.
authorization in our
Okay,
system.
it is.
Yeah,
a
it's
firm number.
62.889, sir.
Oh, okay, well, that's great.
Yeah,
Okay.
62.889. That is being split between about 31 for the student and about, it's actually 31.9 for the student and 30.9 for the institution.
No, I just,
We just got that, like, I think it was on Tuesday, right after I printed this. And I really hated having to change all these numbers and didn't want to confuse you anymore. So certainly wanted to let you know, actually, this shows you how things change from one day to the next. And again, getting those FAQs, 26 pages tell you that, I was telling Mr. Flores, I said, I can imagine that committee in a room, working, day in and day out, trying to come up with those FAQs. And actually very, very good information. So we'll be vetting all that information in the next week or so. So when we look at what is available estimated to be available to make that funding last at the end of August 2023, which, by the way, is really the end of the second this is the second year, the end of the second year of the biennium that we are entering. We are looking at a balance about almost $8 million under the institutional ARPA, and then about 11.8 million under the student side. Then we go into fiscal year 23-24. First year of the following biennium. There is some anticipation that state funding may not pan out the same as it is this year. So we know that we actually can use that funding for lost revenue. And state appropriation is part of that lost revenue. So we may be able to apply, let's say we lose 10% of our appropriation. And 10% of about $60 million is $6 million. So divided by 2, we're looking at $3 million per year of that biennium. And it's not hard. This is what we get a month, by the way. A month, we get about a little bit over $3 million a month in state appropriation. So you can see it would basically cover a month of expenses for that year. So as you can see, little by little, we're trying to expand that money. And again, this is an educated guess in terms of where we're going to allocate it. By the end of December, of 2024, we would have expended everything. That's the goal. But everything here is going to be reshuffled, reallocated based on the need, certainly from, in terms of student aid to our students, depending on obviously the economic conditions. There's just so much unknown at this point. So with that, you have a very preliminary allocation plan, very, high level. We realize there's not a lot of detail because it's really hard to give you detail at this time. So do you have any questions about this particular model?
I have a question.
Yes, Ms.
So,
Sanchez.
One of the slides at the beginning, you had made mention, I think it was on the strategic planning slide for 21 through 22 budget, that there was going to be an increase in the health and insurance budget due to, I guess, a decrease in the appropriations. So I guess my question is whether or not there has been an analysis done or review to determine, and again, I don't know if this is an issue particularly for the college, as to whether or not any of the CARES or ARP funds could be then allocated to help divert that. In other words, there was a connection to say that those health insurance costs were increased as a result of staff members, individuals getting COVID. And so whether or not then that could be appropriated to that. And I don't know what the analysis is because I know folks the majority worked from home, or if the analysis is, dependent on your job duty, and then therefore CARES or ARP could then be used to help offset that. And maybe you're not far ahead in that analysis with ARP, since you're still fleshing that out.
Okay, so two things. So if I heard you correctly, Ms. Sanchez, you were wondering if these funds could cover any lost time by an employee due to,
Well, I don't know necessarily lost time, but perhaps, but I'm thinking of any health insurance costs associated with leave or illness as a result of COVID-19 that employee or staff member would have caught.
well, okay, so for any health insurance costs that were incurred by the individual themselves?
Yeah, I don't know if those costs get reflected back onto the institution, and if so, whether the cost can be offset by CARES or ARP.
So actually, okay, so two things. Okay, so first, what we can recoup is any loss in appropriation due to the fact that, so I'm going to talk about it in a minute. On the health insurance appropriation, actually, we were somewhat penalized. Penalized, I think is the word, Dr. Sadata. We were penalized because we had a decrease in enrollment. So that is directly related to the pandemic. And they cut us 10%. 10%. And so we get $7 million a year as the 50% share that they have to cover for us. Health insurance used to be funded 100%. And then back in 2011, that was changed. I think in 2011, it was 42% that they funded us. And then in 2015, when we had that Senate bill, if I recall, Dr. Sadata, I think Senate Bill 1812, very good number for a bill like this. So 1812 actually guaranteed a 50% contribution from the state. Okay, so, but this now, that 50%, what they're saying, oh, well, you had an enrollment decrease, so that means you had to have less employees. And that also means that because you had less enrollment, then we're going to penalize you by the same amount of the decrease in enrollment that you actually sustained, which was about over 11% in contact hours. So they went ahead and cut our health insurance appropriation by 10%, which is for us $1.4 million. $1.4 million for the 2 year, okay? So $700,000 a year. Fortunately, we've been funded for our health insurance budget a little bit higher than that. So the only impact we've had on the health insurance budget is about a little bit over $450K. And most of that actually was funded. We had some savings in our budget we were able to reallocate. So when you see later on the additional request, we're asking for an additional $124K, that's exactly what it's related to. So that's the first, trying to answer some of that in terms of lost revenue, how we can recover. The second thing is that any additional health insurance cost are going to be reflected in the insurance and premium that will be passed on to us later on. So, for example, we know that the state of Texas, we are insured under Blue Cross Blue Shield. And every year they do, ERS does some kind of, they go out for like a bid process for a new carrier, for a new health insurance carrier. And so whoever gets the bid, they are the ones that are passing on the cost of the premium. So the last 2 years, we have not had any increase in premium, but that would be the way that the college would be penalized. Now, whether or not we can say, because we're not having an increase in premium for next year, as far as we know, but if there was, we may be able to recoup that. But that is a really, really good question. That's something we will explore. But it is really a really good question. So I hope that answers your question. Any other question on this slide? Yes, Mr. Exer.
In the big picture, it looks like that the compensation that we get is to bring us back up to a level, but the level we're looking at is lower than what we are now. And if we project forward, we can't, I think you're going to be facing having to fund an increasing cost structure within the university. I mean, to fall back, you'd also wind up almost having to cut personnel, cut overhead, let's put it that way. Or you're going to have to figure out how to handle the natural growth and increase of an institution based on a smaller, the lower average. So however you look at it, the whole expenditure over the next 4 years, 4.5 years, is actually working at a less than 100% of what a natural growth rate would be. Okay.
So, Mr. Axer, in responding though to that question, let's say we have an enrollment growth. One thing we have not touched the budget on, or we have not reduced the budget, is our any part-time adjunct faculty salaries budget. We have not reduced that. And because we have not reduced that, we continue to have some savings because obviously we are operating at a lower enrollment, therefore we're not opening as many sections. And so we do have some savings there that gives us a little bit of capacity. But I hear you. The thing is, as soon as we do have an enrollment that goes up, we would be then funding that enrollment accordingly.
But you're projecting future expenses on a potential that's not there.
But yes,
Yeah,
but
okay, but,
yeah.
yeah, fair enough. It's just looking at the head, you're going to have a natural growth rate that you're not being compensated, not the same kind of compensation growth that we would see under normal circumstances. Whatever, all this money that we're getting is still not going to bring us back to what a natural growth rate would be.
And you're going to see that with the baseline budget, sir. You will see that. Okay, so let's kind of back to reality a little bit here. Back to reality. So what are we looking at for this year? So this is so important in terms of, because when we look at how we end the fiscal year, also bodes well for what we can add to our fund balance. You know, fund balance, I know this is kind of a nebulous term for a lot of people, but it's just so important that we're able to absorb crisis the way we had. Now, we have been really lucky. Some entities, and we're talking about, you know, colleges, universities, you know, other entities have had to dip into their fund balance to cover their operations. We have not done that at all. We have not done that at all, and that bodes very well. You know, we're getting ready for a reaffirmation, and we've heard that, and I know you've heard me say that, but it's just so important. But it's also one of the things that we have to understand, that this funding that we are getting is for non-recurring expenditures. It cannot be for, you know, across-the-board salary increases that are going to carry into the next years, and then we don't have the money to fund it anymore. So that's one of the things that and I've mentioned that at the April board meeting, is that we have to really understand that all this money that we are receiving is not for recurring expenditures. So we can, and they tell us to be very cautious. The advice here is to say, look, when you are funding any of these items that you really need, make sure that it's not going to create a commitment, a financial commitment in the years to come, unless you can fund it. If you can fund it, then yes, absolutely. It can be seed money for something you can fund later on. But you have to still be very cautious. So here, what you see here before you, fiscal year 2021, without any federal funding. This is actually the reality here, okay? So quickly on state appropriation, we received the same amount of money this year. We were fortunate we were not cut in the second year of the biennium. Tuition and fees, if you recall, when we budgeted, when we did our projections for tuition and fees, we cut that budget, those projected revenue, with an anticipation we would have 20% decrease in the fall of 2020 and a 7% decrease in the spring. Well, it got a little flip-flopped in a way that actually we experienced a 10% decrease in enrollment in the fall instead of 20%. And then in the spring, it was the other way around. We experienced actually a 13% decrease in enrollment. So bottom line, it's kind of pretty much evened out. And this is really well demonstrated here when really we're like $108,000 below what we projected. So when you look at $39 million worth of projected revenue, and we came in within $108,000, we've done pretty good. We've done pretty good. Property taxes, that is the one that is difficult to explain. And let me tell you why. Now, we are slated to receive $4.4 million more. Actually, we have generated $4.4 million more than we had estimated. Two reasons. Okay? The first one, if you recall, when we looked at projected revenue for property tax, we factored a 5% decrease in collection. So the 61,295,000 over here has that kind of decrease, anticipating that 5% decrease in collection. The other thing is that these numbers were based on a certified valuation that was decreased by those Chapter 42 properties. Okay? So that meant, estimating less revenue because you did not have those Chapter 42, that about $1.2 billion, something like that. However, when the tax bills go out, it includes those disputed valuation. Because the taxpayer may still have that under protest, and it may be still in court, but it has not been resolved yet, and they still have to pay their taxes. What they're gonna say if when they have their day in court, and the court says, yes, your valuation was too high, you're entitled a refund. So that means that the different entities are gonna have to turn around and refunds those property owners that won their case. So in a sense, and by the way, that litigation is still ongoing, and that's the reason why we still see here that $4.4 million extra. So it's two things. The fact that we actually have collected to date, at the end of April, close to 98%. We have collected close to 98%. So really, taxpayers have paid their tax bill the way they were supposed to, okay? But for this year, it shows as a windfall. Right? So at the windfall. But what I'm going to show you in a minute is I don't want to be that happy yet. Because I want to anticipate that, guess what? Those homeowners, those commercial property owners, they're going to come back and say, you know what, you owe me over $1 million. And so I'm going to show you in a while that we're going to reserve that money just in case.
Are we someplace where we can take a break?
I'm sorry?
We've been going for over an hour.
You want a break? Absolutely. I'm the energizing bunny. I can go. Absolutely.
I don't want you to break your thought because you were talking about happy, so I want you to stay happy.
It's good to see you. Good, how are you? I'm sorry?
Josette, you ready?
At 3 o'clock?
No, well, it's not going to start on
I know you guys are in deep discussion over there, but are you ready?
We're ready, Judge.
It's a 15-minute break. I think we're ready to go.
It's Friday, Judge. Chop, chop, let's go.
Where did it go? ¿Conectamos?
I thought it was in May.
No, ¿a dónde fueron?
July 26th.
The day before my mom.
Yeah, everybody else.
So that way you can never forget my birthday.
That's right.
Okay, and just for the board and anyone who's listening, the next board meeting we're going to do on the 26th, and we're going to start at 3 in the afternoon. So Counselor, you might want to make a note of that. Counselor, you might want to make a note. 26 at 3.
Speak right here in the middle. I don't need to go. Yeah, it'll pick it. And I can pull it.
Okay, Josette, tell me why you're so happy.
Well, I'm so happy.
Because it's Friday.
Not sure, because it's Friday?
Yeah.
Because I'm almost done with the presentation?
No, that's why I'm so happy. No, I'm just.
I understand.
I love numbers.
Yeah, but I noticed you didn't comment on a couple of areas. I was checking you out.
Okay, so I believe when we left off, we were talking about property taxes and the reason for that $4.4 million additional, surplus revenue over what we had estimated for this current fiscal year. Other income is slated to come in about the same, a little bit below, by $8,700. So when we look at the total operating without the self-supporting, it's about $4.2 million surplus revenue over this, what we had estimated for the total of $135 million 194. When you compare these two numbers over here, we're looking at an additional 4.2 million, 4.2 million, yeah, $4,289,776. When we look at the self-supporting, we had budgeted 3 million. Remember, we had brought that budget down from the previous years, okay? Because we felt like we really needed to really come and really bring those budgets in line with the revenues that were generated. You should see here, actually, pre-pandemic would be about 1.4 million that we would estimate, okay? These programs do, of course, have been affected by enrollment, and they are very much tied also to grants that we receive, and some, it's workforce training, so on and so forth. So here, we are looking at a decrease in revenue of a little bit over $2 million. But when we look at the expenses, you'll see it's pretty much break even, okay? So really what you have to concentrate on is really that $4.2 million extra revenue that we are generating over what we had projected.
That's for this year. That's the
For
money you
just-
hope to have in August of this year.
As of August 31st of this year.
Okay.
So one of the things that you're going to see in the slide after this one is when we're comparing the total revenue that we're anticipating this year to the actual expenditures that we are projecting for the end of this fiscal year, you're going to see a significant increase in fund balance. Okay, because your fund balance is generated by the excess of revenue over expenditures. So if you have additional revenue, and then you also have a less expenses that you had projected, that bodes very well for a good excess over expenditures. Now, I just wanted to kind of go over some of those cost containment measures that we have implemented during the fiscal year. So the travel is on hold until it is budgeted. That's one thing. We have very little budgeted for this year and next year, and it is, of course, safe to travel. We have scrutinized the need for full-time and part-time staff, so that continues. When it comes down, obviously, we don't have as many sections, so we're not spending as much salaries on for adjunct faculty, and also our part-time staff. We did decrease that part-time staff significantly because the way we were working virtually, some of that staff was needed more on campus than they were needed, working from home. So we did have some decrease in those expenses. We did prioritize non-master plan construction projects. We've been very diligent in bringing those to the board, and we will continue to do so. We've postponed, I'm sure you've noticed that we have our intersection that is done outside at ASC, and I hope that you like it, but this was one of the projects that you all approved, and it was really the right time to get that done, but we did not have as much, personnel here on site. We postponed non-critical capital equipment purchases. Does it mean that we don't fund the critical capital equipment? We do, if it can be demonstrated it is critical. We continue to scrutinize the procurement of goods and services for essential need. Our VPs continue to get those requisition review from purchasing, and like twice a week, Mr. Gallardo is sending that information to the VPs, and they are the ones that basically say yes or no, that can wait, kind of thing. Which means what? People probably have said, oh, if it has to go to the VP, I guess we'll just wait for a while, because the VP is probably going to say no. Right? So that's a good cost control to do that. And that doesn't mean we don't fund things that are really needed. We do. And also we have identified some potential budget savings that can help balance the budget for next year.
Excuse me.
So I know this is busy. Yes, sir.
Real quick question, Dr. Serrata.
Yes, sir.
Out of all of this, sort of off the main track, but have we, in prioritizing, have we handled all the ADA and safety requirement, or do we have any pending items in that area? Safety, federal requirements, or ADA, anything like, do we have, or have we handled all of that?
To my knowledge, we've handled all of those.
Okay.
So I know this is a rather busy, for transparency, how we actually estimate what we anticipate at the end of the fiscal year. So the top portion of this slide shows your revenue as budgeted versus projected and any variance. In other words, The positive variance is indicated with basically an absolute number. So if you compare your budget at 135.1 million in revenue, and we projected 139 million, we have a positive variance of 4.2 million or a surplus. The self-supporting account, as you saw a little bit earlier, we're budgeted at 3 million. They're projected to come in about 951,000. So we have a decrease about $2 million. But again, you have to compare those revenues with the actual expenses for the self-supporting account. So the second section of that slide shows the expenses. So the expenses are projected to be at 125,938,243. This is actually, in my estimate, probably the worst case scenario. In other words, those expenses may even be lower by the end of the fiscal year. Because we have considered the big line item that we know we're going to have some savings. And that's what it is actually represented over here. So we anticipate we'll have some salary savings from vacancies. We do have some positions that are funded that are in the process of being recruited or will be recruited very soon. And so obviously, as long as they're not being recruited, they are sitting in our budget, and we have savings that are generated because we're not expending those funds. So we're looking at about $4.3 million. In part-time faculty salary, due to the decrease in enrollment, we have some room in there, about $6 million. Normally, those savings at the end of the fiscal year are about 1.5, 1.7 under a normal enrollment condition. But here, because of the drastic decrease in enrollment, those that are budgeted, and that's what I was talking about earlier, Mr. Uxer, is that we have a little bit of room there too. So if we do have a surge in enrollment, we do have some capacity in the budget to deal with that.
The problem that you and he has out of that, though, is that if you decrease your student load by 17 people, that doesn't mean that you get rid of one instructor. All that means, so in other words, you lose 20 students, but you still have to have support the same number of classes, which means you
Yes,
still
sir.
have the same payroll expense.
Yes,
And
sir,
so
absolutely.
So when
And-
you say it's hard to estimate, yeah, it's hard.
Now, one of the things though that we are looking at is that if we have any costs, additional costs due to that transition to online instruction, we actually can claim those expenses. So I hear what you're saying. That's one of the things that we have discussed. Yeah, we have a decrease in enrollment, but if we decrease the class size, we're still having to pay the instructor. Absolutely, we're very much aware of that. So when you compare your self-supporting account, I'm sorry, I did not finish the other projected savings. We have a contingency fund, about $435,000 that we have not expended. So all of these represent reduction in the budget. Means what? Savings, right? For this fiscal year, okay? However, remember earlier I talked to you about any refunds, potential refunds, that those property owners are gonna come back and say, wait a minute, I paid you back in October the full amount of my tax. I should not have been taxed like that. So you owe me an estimated, and this is, again, it's an estimated amount, $1.8 million. So we're gonna reserve that. We're gonna reserve that out of the budget. We're gonna put it into a reserve. And then should we have a request for a refund, we'll be using that pot of money to refund. So it's not going to hit our bottom line for next year. That's the plan. Okay? So when you take that into consideration, now you're looking at projected expenditures, notwithstanding any other savings in the budget that we know are there. It's kind of hard to estimate until the end of August what's going to happen, but at least here you see a good chunk of money that is going to be set aside, or that's going to be saved. And so when you look at the total picture, so let me kind of show you how this relates. So this projected expenditures over here compare with the budget. Now we are looking at a budget surplus of $9.2 million. So when you combine this amount over here, all these amounts together, so we're looking here at additional net revenue surplus of $2.2 million with a net budget surplus of 11.3 million. We're looking at an estimated increase in fund balance about $13 million by the end of the fiscal year. So this is, again, usually what happens at the end of the fiscal year, what we look at is, okay, how much do we need to put in fund balance to help with the funding of the impact of GASB 68 and 75, and what can we put in a project reserve fund to fund those items, minor construction, it could be purchase of real estate if we need to, anything that is not covered by our bonds. And we know our bonds are almost expended, right? So really, that is not unusual for us to have this kind of increase in fund balance that helps us then fund the kind of things that Mr. Upser was talking about. Any kind of ADA requirements, any kind of minor construction, any major project that we need to fund. And this is not including any federal funds. So, any question on this?
Just I have one question. When you're doing your taxes, I think you're low at 7.2%, since everybody's tax rate went up about 15% on their values. When they give you that figure at the end of July, everybody goes and fights it. At what time do they finally say, okay, enough's enough, here's your check?
Okay, so according to the CAD, they are looking at like 35,000 protests, which means that probably a lot of the protests will not be resolved by when they certify it on July the 25th. My understanding, I think they have until September maybe to kind of wrap this up. I don't recall exactly the time frame. However, Mr. Haggerty, what happens though is when they certify that valuation, they have a discounted valuation to allow for those protests. Okay?
Yeah,
So
because
we
they
know-
don't know how many they're gonna lose.
They don't necessarily know, but they certified at least at 95%. At 95%. So but they still kind of, not only they have a Chapter 42 disputed value that is under litigation, but they also have those other valuations, those other protests. And so they probably reserve, in the past they have reserved about 2-3%, and they're talking about reserving a little bit higher amount this time. But I will get more information, and I will be able to update you in July about this.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, trying to estimate tax revenue has become a little bit more complicated in the past. In the past, I could always roll forward what you got in the current fiscal year and then add new property, right? Now, it doesn't work that way anymore. It is actually pretty, you have to really delve into the numbers on those preliminary valuation and understand actually where the numbers come from. And it's quite complicated, and I don't think you want me to cover all of that.
Oh, sure we do.
Yeah, well, I probably would need a whole lot more information, but we've been meeting quite a bit with Ms. Kilgore and her staff, and they've been very, very good about, trying to explain to us what the situation, what's going on. It is pretty, a lot of those protests also from commercial properties is due to the fact that they feel like they've lost valuation because of COVID, therefore they should not be taxed at the same valuation as the previous year. So that's the reason why the commercial property are also protesting, because in light of their lost revenue, they feel like they should not have, they should not have a higher valuation. What you see here before you is what would the revenues for this year look like because we're able to draw down against the federal funding, okay? So we are slated to draw down about an additional about $9.4 million. And so that means is what? It's going to enhance our actual fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. Now remember, I cannot use those numbers going forward, right? So this is only for this year. And remember that all this federal funding is one-time funding. And in the following year, it's not the same. It may be the same, but we're drawing another one time, but it cannot be used in perpetuity. So here, this just shows you the same information, except it's been enhanced with our lost revenue recovery. So it's just going to give you an idea of really, this bodes well for the end of the fiscal year with an increase in fund balance. And that is actually the purpose of this funding, is trying to help institutions or entities to rebuild their fund balance that they've lost because they've lost revenue. So that's really the purpose of that. Remember, your fund balance is one-time funding. Once you exhaust it, it's gone, and then you have to rebuild it again. So this funding is helping rebuild those entities that receive federal funding, that lost, that had to use maybe their fund balance to fund their budget for this year. It's helping them rebuild that. For us, it's certainly going to help. So going into 21-22, the projections are going to be based on the state appropriation, based on the 87th legislature. The tuition revenue is based on the current enrollment at the tuition rate that it has been also adjusted for increase in exemptions. We have an additional 7 early college high school starting this fall. So we have adjusted the tuition revenue based on that. I also want to emphasize that the tuition revenue is based on current enrollment, but we left summer flat. In other words, what we projected for the summer is based on the budget. So it is really important that we bring up our enrollment figures to at least the same level as the last summer. Otherwise, I'm going to have to reduce my tuition revenue that you're going to see in just a while, okay? So it is really the caveat that those tuition revenue is based on the current enrollment, but also not adjusted summer as it stands right now. If we were to do that, we would have to reduce those revenue projection for the summer significantly. And so we don't want to do that at this point. Property tax revenue is based on the April 30th preliminary evaluation of $50.7 billion. So pretty big increase. Again, preliminary, we know that's going to go down. We know by July it's going to go down from the $50.7 billion. It does include, the nice surprise is that we did have a fairly good additional new property, $934 million. And so when we met with Ms. Kilgore sometime in March, actually she was concerned that the new property was not very high, but here it did pan out to be about $934 million. So the revenue you're going to see in a little while, the tax revenue, is based on the preliminary. Remember, we don't call it the effective tax rate anymore. We call it the no new revenue tax rate. In other words, that is a tax rate that generates the same amount of property as the previous year based on the same properties that were on the tax rolls. Okay? Now, we're looking here at 12.8911, 12 cents, 12.8911 cents per $100 valuation. Current rate is 13.98. So you can see like a penny down, right? So it is pretty significant, but it's very preliminary. We know that we've had the surprise before when, we have a lower tax rate, a lower non-new revenue tax rate, and then all of a sudden it jumps up above the current tax rate. It has happened. So, again, very preliminary. And our certified property valuation is going to be due July the 25th, and the final non-new revenue tax rate will be calculated at that time, once we get the new valuation, and will be published in early August. So what are we looking at from the 87th legislature? We know it's a big pot of money, of course. That means about over $60 million for us over a 2-year period. We know that right now it is at flat funding. They basically kept the same funding, except that the allocation is very different. And the allocation actually to all colleges is based on individual enrollment. There's been a decrease in, and this is, by the way, the House version, because the Senate version actually provided for more funding in student success points. So, the appropriation that I'm going to be showing in a little while is based on this model here.
So they actually went with a decrease on the success points?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Serrata, what happened there?
For the Senate version. I'm sorry, the House version. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so since Ms. Shaughnessy put this together, I received notice last night that they are actually, the House went in conferees, they went with the Senate version. So it actually brings down our loss to about 1.1 million, and they increase success points, Dr. Graham. So success points will now account for about almost 18% of community college funding for this session. Next session, I'm sure it will come down.
And at one point, we were also looking at some funding for the hold harmless. However, my understanding is we're, based on what we received or what we've heard on the latest, is that no hold harmless is going to be applied to us. It is being applied for other institutions, but we are not actually receiving under any additional funding under hold harmless. So what is the impact of the House bill on the, and again, this, we understand this is the worst case scenario. You heard Dr. Serrata, now we're looking at really going with the Senate version, which is gonna bode well for us, a little bit better. Instead of losing $1.4 million, we're gonna be losing 1.1. So it's still, you know, every little bit helps. But based on those revenues that based on the budget that I'm gonna show you in a little while, we're looking at $62.7 million. And here you can see the core operations stayed the same. The student success points went down, and so did the contact hour funding. The surprise year, that was very disappointing actually, because we already struggle quite a bit funding the health insurance budget. Like I said earlier, that represents over half of our total benefits budget. And so we are funded at $12.6 million for the biennium, or a decrease of $1.4 million over the previous biennium. And that decrease is attributable to that was the LBB recommendation to fund health insurance based on contact hour enrollment. Yes, sir.
Question, Dr. Strada. How do you calculate success points in the future? I mean, is it a percentage of previous, or do you forecast completion and then success point?
Yeah, no, Mr. Exer, what the state does is the state takes a 3-year rolling average of success points at institutions. And so they're going back the current biennium, the current year that we're in, and they go back 2 years before that, and they average all of that. What they did is, if you look at just head count amongst the 50 community colleges, head count and contact hours, and if the state chose to fund us, as they always have in the past, on head count and contact hours, community colleges would be cut $175 million this session. The state chose to flat fund us, the same $1.833 billion, but what they did is they looked at contact hours, and the state average loss was 9.5%. And so if you were down less than that, you actually got an increase in funding. So even though your head count and contact hours are lower, you saw a significant increase in funding. If you were below the 9.5% that the state average was, and we were at 11% with contact hours, then you received a cut. So we're very fortunate that the state has chosen to fund us flat. And along with those with success points, the Senate version of the funding bill, when they went with the $1.833 billion for the 50 community colleges, they chose to take $86.5 million out of contact hour funding and put that into student success points. So the rate actually increased, and it's up to almost 18% of our total funding. There's a reason why the legislature did that, because they didn't want our contact hours to be inflated, because next session, they're going to fund us based on head count, contact hours, and all of us are going to say, you funded our contact hours so much lower. So they chose to put that money into student success points. So there was no way that we would have ever anticipated that success points, which now Ms. Shaughnessy has up there, the House version, $194.20. It is now significantly higher than that. It's significantly over $200 per success point.
So the funding formula based on contact hours and head count is a formula that's negotiated and renegotiated every term?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, they'll say that they use something as a baseline, but basically it's what happened is that they know the answer and they try to figure out what to adjust to get to the answer they want.
That's exactly what they do, Mr. Uxer.
Okay.
That's exactly how it works.
So on the good news about the health insurance, that does not really, actually, I mean, it's the good news in terms of the budget, but certainly that was not good news for us because we did lose $1.4 million. But the good news is we did have some capacity in the budget to absorb some of that decrease. And because we had some savings in other budgets that we were able to reallocate. However, you will see in a little while the request for an additional close to $125,000 to supplement the budget. So now our benefits budget will be, for health insurance, will be like over $8 million versus 7.5 that we had the previous year. There was an increase in state contribution for TRS retirement benefits. And that was a very minor effect, very minor impact on the budget, and we were able to actually fund that internally because again, our budget for TRS retirement benefits was well funded. So when we look at revenue projections, again, remember this is the worst case scenario. So now looks like we're going to gain a little bit of money, not a whole lot, about $150,000 a year if I'm calculating that correctly. But here, what you're looking at is probably the worst case scenario. So our state appropriation are, when we compare what we have this year's budget versus projected appropriation, we are looking at a variance about close to $800,000. What we do not have in the projected revenue for appropriation is an allocation for Hazelwood. And we usually don't know that until they actually tell us, or we receive it. Sometimes we're surprised, we got some additional money here in the bank because we get a transfer and we are told it's for Hazelwood, Hazelwood exemption. So, and that's about maybe $70-some thousand. It kind of varies every year. So that's not in there. That is not in there. So it could be that really that variance is actually a little lower when everything is all said and done. The overhead recovery here is also very, very conservative. Remember, overhead recovery is those indirect costs that recover from grants and contracts. And we know we have some major grants that are in the works. We also have, of course, the federal grants that we can claim indirect cost. And so most likely this is going to look much better for next year, but we are being conservative like we normally are. So when we look at local funds, tuition and fees, you can see is slightly lower than what we budgeted for this year to cover our budget. And that, again, is not based on current enrollment with really flat summer enrollment. So we need to work really hard at bringing that summer enrollment to that level. Otherwise, you're going to see that number here decrease. And that total number of $39.1 million. Property taxes, as I mentioned earlier, is based on preliminary valuation. The preliminary valuation does exclude those Chapter 42, okay? So this is conservative. However, when those tax bills come in next October, that amount could be higher than that. We could be put in the same position as this year. Other income is budgeted the same as for this year, and same thing with your self-supporting program at break even. So when we look at the total revenue for next year that is projected, a little bit over $140 million, $140,739,998, or an increase of about $2.5 million over this year. So that's going to change most likely by the time that we get to at the end of July, but at least this gives you an idea what it looks like for next year. It certainly looks better than last year, right? So that's the good point here. This chart, I won't spend too long. I mean, you've seen it before for the sake of time. So here what you see is actually a preliminary expenditure budget. And this is, as you've seen that before, pretty much sorted by executive level. This is the way we get this information from the various executive levels. We compile this information from all the budget requests. And here you can see that your total institutional account, when you compare the adopted for this year to what now the baseline is, remember the baseline is your adopted budget adjusted for any salary savings because of vacancies during this fiscal year. So we're looking now at a savings about $503,000. Now, when you look at the detail per executive level, so financial administrative operation, which is my area, it shows that I have a decrease in my budget of $549,000. No, nobody cut my budget. I didn't cut my own budget. It just means that I had a contingency fund in there to fund any positions that became critical during the fiscal year, and that was reallocated to the other executive level. So I basically gave some money away, okay? But the way you look at this, you cannot look at, so-and-so, like instruction and workforce education has a decrease of $124,000. That doesn't mean that VP Smith lost $124,000. That means that in his area, he had some vacancies, he had some faculty that retired, he had some staff that retired, and that created some salary savings. This represents the movement of, the positions, the staffing plan when someone resigns or retires. So this is actually $500,000. This is, by the way, as of February the 28th. So this number is going to move because since February the 28th, we've had additional retirements, we've had additional vacancies that will create some capacity in the budget because those salaries for those positions have been reduced to the entry level, the highest range of the entry level. Mr. Exer?
Drop of $550,000 in finance and administration, and is that just, again, the salaries?
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, it was because in the original budget, in the adopted budget of $15 million, we had a contingency fund in there, and that contingency fund was used to fund some critical positions that happened during the fiscal year. And so when everything is all said and done, we reallocated from the contingency fund to the various executive level.
Okay.
That's what it means. And this one is pretty much, it's the same information except this is sorted by a function. And when you approve the budget in August, actually this is the way you're going to approve the budget. You don't approve the budget by executive level, you approve the budget in total by function. And this is the required format. You have all these charts in there. I don't know if you would like me to go over that. I know it's a lot of information, or do you want me to move on to the bottom line? What would you like me to do?
Move.
Move, okay. Very good. And you have all this information in your packet. So, as a result of our budget development process, the executive level turned in also additional requests. And so this year, just like every year, we review those critical requests, and we separate them by must be funded and by other type of funding request. Now, that doesn't mean the executive level funding requests are not needed or must not be funded. All it means is the must be funded, we really don't have a choice, okay? We're gonna get hit with health insurance. We have to pay our premiums for the employees to the tune about $8 million a year, okay? So $124,660, that's the amount I was talking to you earlier. And that's the additional that we need in order to fund that budget. State unemployment is kind of one of those really iffy situations. So we have currently a state unemployment budget. This is obviously to compensate when people have like especially our part-time staff, obviously our adjunct faculty when they have lost classes they have not been able to teach because of lost enrollment. Then they've gone to TWC, file a claim, and we are obviously self-funded and we are responsible for those claims. And so the $162,000 is to actually reflect that current situation. That doesn't mean 2 years from now, it cannot be reduced. But in the midst of this economic crisis, the unemployment rate is pretty high. We obviously feeling that impact, and we're having to revise our budget accordingly. The Central Appraisal District fees, that is directly related to the way they approve their budget, and it's based on our levy, our tax levy, and we don't have a choice, okay? They are appraising our property, and therefore we have to pay for those fees. And then the other item that you see here that is new, we have a procedure that calls for a background check of employees if they are new to the district. And this, by the way, is extremely important for us to be insured. You know, so any property, any especially educators' liability, when it comes down to motor vehicle records check, this is something that is now required. If we want to have our vehicles being insured, we have to have this in place, or our premiums are going to go up drastically, because guess what? We are putting the insurance company at liability, and they don't want that, right? So we are implementing this procedure. And so we need about $61,000 to conduct those kind of checks. And so we're looking at must be funded a little bit over $400,000 at this point. We're still vetting a lot of the funding requests. And we did receive quite a few funding requests, the tune about, including the must be funded, to about $2.5 million. And we are vetting them, where we separate them and say what must be funded, what is a recurring funding. Every year, this is what I'm going to need. So this is the $1.3 million. There were also other requests that were related to either the pandemic or related to one time of equipment funding, and we're going to find another way to fund that if we have that capacity, which we think we can do that. Any questions on this?
Where were the 10,000 for the student enrollment services?
Oh, gee, I'm not quite sure, Dr. Grant. Let me see.
Because we keep talking about enrollment, but if we keep doing the same thing we've been doing, we're not going to increase it.
I'm trying to remember what the $10,000 was about. We can probably find that information for you.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I know that Dr. Gonzalez has been actually requesting additional staff to help during this enrollment period, and we've provided some funds for him to add to kind of reduce the bottlenecks in the registration process. So as we speak, he's actually working on that, and he's added some staff, and we've been able to fund that because he truly needed some help. So we are doing that.
Because I do have a concern with
It's additional travel for training that the police officers need. So it's mandatory police officer training?
And that's to help with enrollment?
Well, it's, okay, so what you see, the executive level, this is, each executive level requested that money. So it's not necessarily for enrollment, but it's the VP area of student enrollment services. The police department belongs to that area.
Oh, I see. For that department, not
Yes,
for
ma'am.
the... Same thing with the other one, the instruction and workforce?
It's a variety of different requests, so it could be full-time, part-time staff, certainly recurring, and I would say probably was full-time and part-time staff. And we're going to be vetting, we're going to be meeting with Dr. Serrata in the June, July timeframe to review all of these requests, to see what actually we can fund. And because right now, the $1.3 million is not funded, and you'll see that in just a minute. That is not funded right now.
And I just noticed that we have attorney's fee in our handout. We have the $230,000 attorney's fees, which is not reflected on this slide right here.
Yes, sir, you should have gotten a revised.
Yeah, it's right here. It's in the book.
It was in your original book, but then you should have received a corrected.
So there were a couple
Yeah,
of
we did that.
pages
It's by
that were
itself.
placed at every station that were 2 revised places that we just got.
Oh, so we took, the revision moved the $230,000 out to some
That's
other
correct.
area?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually,
Is he
no,
still
sir, we
getting
did.
paid? Or did we just say that we revised them out? Did the cancel culture take care of Scott Holtz for this year?
I think it's attorney-client privilege, I think.
So that certainly, that was an error that was found, and that's one of the things, when we work to give you a presentation, so in time for you to review the information, and then we found that error after we had distributed that. So we discussed it, and we certainly didn't want to embarrass Mr. Ortega, so we said, no, we're going to remove that, because truly, no, we're going to be meeting the budget. That's the expectation that we'll meet the budget, in spite of the many, many services they are offering.
I'll embarrass him.
Yeah. So actually, we did not move it anywhere, it's just that we're not asking for it.
Oh.
Okay, so we're almost at the very last slide here of the presentation. This kind of reflects, if you recall last year when I presented, I had all kinds of scenarios, right? All kinds of scenarios, 6 different scenarios about decreases in revenue, decreases in expenses. Here you basically have one scenario that is based on, that is looking at a potential salary enhancement, which has been the norm in years past, when everything was under, normal conditions. So the very first row under those scenarios for salary enhancement shows you total projected revenue, again, preliminary. So for each one of those scenarios, that number comes from the revenue projection total, so the $140,739,998, and then we compare that to the baseline budget. So your baseline budget of $137.6 million, when you compare those two, then we're looking at a budget surplus at the moment. So again, remember, those projected revenue are based on current enrollment, fall and spring, and then hopefully we come in flat for the summer. If we have an increase in enrollment, then that's great. That means those revenues go up, right? And it gives us a little bit additional budget surplus. So when we look at the budget surplus before any additional needs, we're looking a little bit over $3 million of a budget surplus. And what can we do with that? Where we need to fund, those must be funded that I mentioned earlier. And so when you consider those items, then we're looking at a budget surplus of $2.6 million to consider a possible salary enhancement package for our faculty and staff. So when you consider any salary enhancement that is based on 1%, 2%, and 3%, then your worst case scenario is at 3%. We have a budget deficit of $125,000, but I anticipate that baseline budget that you see, $137.6 million, that will go down. By the time that we are done with adjusting the baseline budget, we probably have some capacity to fund that $125 million deficit. This does not take into any consideration other funding requests. So we're going to be monitoring that as, in the next couple of months. Should we get additional revenue, that would certainly help fund some of these funding requests. We can look into our budget to fund some of those funding requests. We could look at any savings we have in salaries, in those part-time faculty pool or part-time staff salary. We could also look at that. So there's still some work to be done before we come before you on the adopted budget in August. And with that, our next steps is we're going to continue our recruitment effort for summer and fall registration. We're going to revise and refine our revenue projections if needed. We're going to refine the plan for allocating federal funds over the next 2 biennia. We're going to evaluate our cost containment measures. Do we need to keep them in place? Can we relax them a little bit to give us a little bit more flexibility? We need to continue our budget review for potential savings, and then we'll also evaluate additional requests to be funded. And so this is the calendar here for the adoption of the budget. May 30th, we anticipate another updated appraisal. We know that appraisal is going to go down as compared to April because some protests probably already have been resolved. June 30th, we'll have another appraisal. That's actually required by the code. And then July 25th, we should be getting our certified property appraisal to be accepted if we're able to, depend on when we get that information versus when we have the board meeting in July. There's a good chance we'll probably have the acceptance of the certified appraisal rather at the August meeting, depending on, when we have the board meeting in July. July, we'll probably do another budget workshop to update you on all these revenues. And then in August, we'll be ready to present to you a proposed budget for adoption. And with that,
Exciting as always, Josie. Very exciting.
I certainly thank you for all
I
of your
hope
attention.
your projections are right on. I hope we,
Well, we hope so too.
Okay, well, thank you.
I still want my job.
thank you very much. Do y'all need another break? That was another 50 minutes, or you want to go on to the next item?
No, let's go so we can.
You want to go to the
Move
next
on.
item? Okay, y'all. Okay, Pam, number 5.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Ms.
ma'am.
Shaughnessy.
Josette. Thank your team also.
Item 5.1, discussion and take possible action on the approval of a one-time incentive pay for employees of the El Paso County Community College District.
Chair Haggerty and members of the board, I'd respectfully ask the board to table this item. We thought we were ready. We have some additional information. Ms. Shaughnessy and I are continuing to work on it, as well as her staff, Mr. Flores and others. So I would ask respectfully that the board table this item until the meeting on the 26th.
Do we have a motion?
Can I ask a question? Dr. Sarata, thank you. No, I have no issue tabling it. The only question I would have is in terms of the timeline. So we anticipate that this will be posted for the board's consideration agenda at the end of May.
Yes, ma'am.
Will that be the only time that we will be able to vote on that?
No,
Or
no, ma'am. The board can choose to review the information. We'll provide it. And if the board chooses to do that in June, to take action on that in June, then we can do that in June. It is a proposal for a one-time incentive pay. So the board can do that as long as we were to do that before the end of the summer. We were just trying to get it in May, given the fact that we're proposing to the board a consideration for a salary enhancement. I'm trying to make sure that there's some time between those, ma'am.
No, absolutely. Okay, great, thank you.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Hear a second?
I think, didn't you make the motion?
I did not, no, ma'am.
Oh, second.
Any other discussion? Call a question, Pam.
Mr. Uxer,
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye?
Dr. Graham,
Aye.
Ms. Naheda,
Aye.
Ms. Pena,
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty.
Aye? We don't have any items for executive session. Nope. Okay. So I have a motion for adjournment.
Are you gonna announce the next meeting? Oh, you already did.
You what?
The next meeting? You already announced.
I think we said the next meeting is going to be the 26th, and we're going to move the time to 3 o'clock. I think everybody made note of that. So all in favor for adjournment, say aye.
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 Any opposed? So moved.
I'm opposed, Judge.
All right, we'll see you all on the 26th.
Thank you, Judge.